My name is Caroline, 34 years old, and I spent my entire 20s believing I was the ultimate family failure. At 28, I found an unopened Harvard Business School acceptance letter tucked away in the back of my mother Beverly's dresser. It had been mailed 6 years earlier, complete with a full-ride scholarship. My mother deliberately hid it, and even forged a rejection letter on my behalf, just so I would stay home to babysit my brother Jason's kids and work as their unpaid accountant. When I eventually confronted her with the stolen mail in my hands, she looked me dead in the eye and said the family simply needed me more. That night, I packed my bags, took the letter, and walked out into the freezing rain. What Harvard did next shocked everyone. Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to break free from a toxic family to build your own empire from the ground up. Catch! The heavy set of house keys hit my chest hard before clattering onto the polished marble floor of the foyer. I looked up from the massive wicker laundry basket in my hands to see my sister-in-law, Jasmine, adjusting a diamond earring in the gilded hallway mirror. Jasmine was a luxury real estate agent, a striking and fiercely ambitious black woman who treated every family gathering like a high-stakes networking event. More importantly, she treated me like unpaid domestic staff. She and my brother Jason were dressed to the nines, preparing for a high-profile charity gala downtown. Jasmine turned to me, her perfectly manicured finger pointing toward the kitchen. "The kids need to be in bed by 8, she instructed, her tone clipping the air like a pair of scissors. "Make sure they finish their math homework first. And do not let them eat that cheap cereal you bought yesterday." I left a specific list of acceptable organic snacks on the granite island. "Oh, and clean up the kitchen before you go to sleep. The caterers made a mess prepping for tomorrow, and I need it spotless before the professional cleaning service arrives on Monday." Jason, my younger brother by 3 years, and the undisputed golden child of the family, walked down the sweeping staircase, adjusting the cuffs of his custom-tailored tuxedo. He ran our parents' medical device company, a position handed to him on a silver platter the moment he graduated with a mediocre business degree. Despite his absolute lack of financial literacy, he strutted around like a titan of industry. The reality was much darker. The company was currently hemorrhaging money due to his reckless spending and poorly planned acquisitions. For the past 6 years, I had been the one quietly fixing his accounting errors, reconciling the ledgers in the dead of night, and literally saving the business from bankruptcy. I did all of this without a single paycheck, a title, or a word of thanks. "Thanks for stepping up tonight, Care," Jason said, clapping me lightly on the shoulder in a deeply patronizing way. "You know how important this gala is for the company image. Vanguard Investment Group is going to be there. Jasmine and I need to look like the ultimate power couple tonight if we want them to fund my expansion plans." Jasmine scoffed lightly, running a smoothing hand down her silk evening gown. "You are 28 years old, Caroline," she said finally, turning to look directly at me with a perfectly arched brow. "Since you do not have a real career to worry about, the least you can do is be useful around here. Consider it paying rent for the privilege of living under your parents' roof." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood, desperate to keep from screaming. I had given up everything to support this family. I was the invisible glue keeping Jason out of federal court for financial negligence. I was the one managing the sprawling household, raising their children while they attended luxury open houses and expensive dinners. Yet in their eyes, I was just a tragic, incompetent spinster sister. I was a domestic servant they did not even have to tip. "Before we leave," Jason said, suddenly patting the pockets of his tuxedo pants, "I need the spare keys to the SUV. Mom borrowed them yesterday to move her car out of the driveway and I cannot find them anywhere." "They are probably up in her bedroom," Jasmine said, waving her hand dismissively toward the second floor. "Caroline, go find them. We are going to be late, and I refuse to be seen arriving after the Vanguard executives." They walked out the heavy mahogany front door without another word, leaving me standing completely alone in the massive foyer of my parents' Connecticut estate. The silence they left behind was suffocating, filled with the crushing weight of 1,000 unspoken resentments. I set the laundry basket down at the foot of the stairs and made my way up to my mother Beverly's master suite. Beverly treated her bedroom like a royal chamber. The room smelled intensely of lavender and expensive leather. It was a monument to her vanity and her obsession with appearances. Framed professional photographs of Jason and Jasmine looking like royalty dominated the walls and surfaces. There were absolutely no pictures of me anywhere in the room. I began searching for the spare SUV keys on her ornate vanity, shifting aside jars of expensive face creams, discarded pearl necklaces, and velvet jewelry pouches. When I could not find the keys on the vanity, I moved to her massive walk-in closet, checking the pockets of the coats she had worn recently. Still nothing. Frustrated, I walked over to the tall oak nightstands flanking her king-sized bed. I opened the top drawer, finding only reading glasses and novels. I opened the middle drawer, pushing aside neatly folded silk scarves. Then I crouched down to check the bottom shelf of the nightstand. Pushed far into the very back, hidden beneath a stack of old bank statements and heavy winter blankets, my hand brushed against a heavy polished oak box. I tried to pull my hand back, but my sleeve caught roughly on the intricate brass clasp securing the front of the box. I tugged my arm to free the fabric, and the heavy oak box tumbled forward. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud, sharp crack. The old brass latch shattered on impact, and the contents spilled out across the floorboards. I quickly knelt down to gather the scattered papers, my heart racing with the fear that Beverly would return and accuse me of snooping through her private belongings. I intended to put everything back exactly as I had found it. But as my fingers brushed against a thick cream-colored envelope lying near the broken latch, time seemed to stop entirely. The envelope bore a crimson crest that I recognized instantly. It was the official seal of the Harvard Business School. My breath hitched in my throat. The envelope was addressed directly to me. Caroline Hayes. I looked closely at the faded postmark stamped across the top right corner. It was dated exactly 6 years ago. It was mailed the exact same week I had anxiously waited by the mailbox every single day for my admission results. The top of the envelope was cleanly sliced open, the high-quality paper yellowing slightly at the edges from years of being locked away in the dark. With trembling fingers and a mind completely blank with shock, I slowly pulled out the heavy cardstock folded inside. The thick cream-colored paper unfolded in my hands. The elegant black text at the top read, "Office of Admissions." My eyes darted to the very first sentence. "Dear Caroline, it is my distinct pleasure to inform you that you have been admitted to the Harvard Business School MBA program." I stopped breathing. The words blurred, then snapped into sharp, agonizing focus. "Furthermore, in recognition of your outstanding academic record and exceptional potential, you have been awarded a full tuition Dean Fellowship." I traced the raised embossed lettering with my trembling index finger. 6 years ago, I was 22. I had graduated at the top of my class from a local state university, fighting for every single grade while working exhausting night shifts at a logistics firm. I remembered the exact day the postmark indicated. I remembered waiting by the front window watching the mail carrier walk up our long driveway. Beverly had practically sprinted to meet him at the curb that day, claiming she was expecting urgent medical documents from my father. She walked back inside with a thick stack of envelopes, looked me dead in the eye, and handed me a single junk mail grocery flyer. She told me there was nothing else. She watched me sink into a deep, crushing despair over the next few weeks as all the other graduate programs sent their responses. She watched me cry on the kitchen floor when I thought Harvard had simply thrown my application in the trash. I remembered her standing over me, patting my shoulder with feigned sympathy. She had said, "You need to be realistic, Caroline. Not everyone is meant for the Ivy League. Jason is struggling with the new medical device company, and Jasmine needs help with the baby. The family needs you here. Why chase impossible dreams when you can be useful to your own blood?" My hand reached into the scattered pile on the floor to retrieve a second folded piece of paper. It was a photocopy of a typed letter. The letterhead belonged to my father's medical device company. I scanned the text. "To the Harvard Admissions Committee. I am writing to formally decline my acceptance and the generous fellowship offer. Due to critical unforeseen family obligations, I am required to remain in Connecticut to support our family business. Please withdraw my application immediately." At the bottom of the page was my signature. It was a flawless, highly practiced forgery of my handwriting. The sheer calculated malice of it struck me like a physical blow to the chest. Beverly had not just hidden the acceptance letter, she had actively impersonated me to slam the door shut permanently. She had orchestrated the entire scenario to ensure I had no escape route. Jason had just taken over the company that same year, completely unqualified and arrogant. Jasmine had just entered the competitive luxury real estate market and refused to hire a nanny because she wanted to project the flawless image of a hands-on mother who could do it all. They needed a free caretaker. They needed an unpaid financial analyst who was desperate enough for family approval to work 80-hour weeks for zero equity. I was not just a convenient option. I was a captive resource bound by lies. The initial wave of paralyzing shock receded quickly, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. I did not cry. I did not scream. The girl who desperately sought her mother's validation died right there on the expensive Persian rug. In her place, a new woman emerged, sharp, calculating, and unyielding. The grief of 6 stolen years crystallized into a terrifying, icy rage. I looked around the lavish bedroom, taking in the designer bags, the crystal perfume bottles, and the heavy silk drapes funded entirely by the company I had kept afloat. Every piece of luxury in this room was bought with my stolen future. For 6 years, I had been the invisible ghost keeping Jason out of federal court for financial negligence. Whenever he approved a disastrous acquisition, I stayed up until 4 in the morning restructuring the debt. Whenever he spent company funds on Jasmine's lavish vacations, I buried the losses in complex tax deferrals to keep the board of directors from finding out. I held all the keys to their fake empire. I simply had been too blindly loyal to weaponize that knowledge. That loyalty was now entirely gone. I carefully folded the Harvard acceptance letter and the forged rejection notice. I slid them securely into the inner pocket of my cardigan. My fingers brushed against a heavy set of keys resting near the back of the bottom shelf. It was the missing SUV keys Jason had demanded earlier. I picked them up, felt the cold metal against my palm, and tossed them carelessly into the nearest trash can, hidden under Beverly's vanity. They could take a taxi to their gala. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my clothes. My mind was already moving 5 steps ahead. The statute of limitations for federal mail theft. The master financial ledgers I had backed up on a secure cloud server just last week. The exact amount of money Jason had siphoned from the employee pension fund. I had all the data. I walked down the sweeping staircase with a calm, measured pace. The massive colonial house felt different now. It was no longer a prison. It was a crime scene. I bypassed the overflowing laundry basket sitting in the foyer. I ignored the list of organic snacks Jasmine had left on the kitchen island. I walked straight into the home office, booted up my laptop, and began printing out the master ledgers I had reconciled over the past 6 months. Row after row of red ink poured from the printer documenting Jason's gross incompetence and my silent corrections. I placed the thick stack of financial reports on the mahogany dining table. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, took a seat at the head of the table, and waited. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the minutes. The children were upstairs glued to their tablets, completely ignoring the homework I was supposed to enforce. I did not care. My duty as the family servant was officially terminated. The heavy oak front door swung open, shattering the quiet of the house. My mother Beverly swept into the foyer, her expensive silk scarf trailing behind her like a royal cape. My father Howard trailed obediently in her wake, his arms loaded with shopping bags from high-end boutiques. Beverly stopped short, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. She stared at the laundry basket I had deliberately abandoned at the foot of the stairs. "Caroline?" she snapped, her voice carrying through the sprawling house. "Why is this laundry still sitting here? Jasmine specifically asked you to handle the chores before she left." I remained perfectly still in the dining room, taking another slow sip of my sparkling water. I did not answer. "Caroline!" Beverly marched into the formal dining room, her eyes narrowing as she found me sitting at the head of the mahogany table. "What exactly do you think you are doing? Get out of your father's chair immediately. And why is the kitchen not spotless? I swear you are completely useless sometimes. Howard stepped into the room, setting the shopping bags down with a heavy sigh. Now, Beverly, do not raise your voice. I am sure she is just taking a short break. A break from what? Howard? Beverly shot back, crossing her arms. Living rent-free in our home, eating our food. I set my glass down. The sharp clink of crystal against wood silenced them both. I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out the cream-colored Harvard envelope, and tossed it onto the center of the table. It slid across the polished mahogany, coming to a dead stop exactly halfway between us. Beverly looked at the envelope. For a fraction of a second, the immaculate, arrogant mask she wore slipped. Her eyes widened and a flash of genuine panic crossed her face. But just as quickly, the mask snapped back into place, replaced by an expression of cold, terrifying indignation. You went snooping through my private bedroom, Beverly stated, her tone dropping to a dangerous quiet register. You broke into my personal belongings like a common thief. I was looking for the spare car keys, I replied, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. But I found a stolen future instead. Care to explain why my Harvard Business School acceptance letter was locked in your nightstand for 6 years? Howard adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looking nervously between the envelope and my mother. Beverly, what is she talking about? Is that really from Harvard? Oh, please, Howard, do not act so naive, Beverly scoffed, stepping closer to the table. She did not even try to deny it. She did not offer a tearful apology or claim it was a terrible mistake. She simply lifted her chin, looking down at me with absolute contempt. Yes, it is from Harvard, and I did you a massive favor by hiding it, Caroline. You should be thanking me. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer audacity of her delusion. Thanking you. You forged my signature on a rejection letter. You committed a federal crime to trap me in this house. I kept you grounded, Beverly fired back, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. You were 22 years old and completely oblivious to how the real world works. Do you really think a plain, uncharismatic girl like you could survive in the Ivy League? They would have eaten you alive. You would have embarrassed yourself, and more importantly, you would have embarrassed this family. The family? I repeated, the bitter taste of the word sitting heavy on my tongue. You mean Jason? Yes, Jason. Beverly slammed her manicured hand onto the table. Your brother had just taken over your father's company. He was under immense pressure. Jasmine was busy establishing her luxury real estate career. They needed reliable help at home. They needed someone to manage the accounting without demanding a ridiculous salary. The family needed you here, Caroline. What use is a business degree for a girl who belongs behind the scenes anyway? I turned my gaze to my father, hoping perhaps for the last time that he would finally stand up and be a parent. Did you know about this, Dad? Did you know she stole my full-ride scholarship just to turn me into Jason's unpaid nanny and bookkeeper? Howard looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He rubbed the back of his neck, his posture shrinking under Beverly's commanding presence. Caroline, try to understand, he muttered weakly. Your mother makes the difficult choices to keep the peace. Jason is the heir to my company. He represents our legacy. Sometimes we all have to make personal sacrifices for the greater good of the family. It was just a school. Just a school, I echoed, feeling a dark, hollow laugh rise in my throat. I stood up, grabbing the thick stack of printed financial reports I had placed on the table earlier. I threw them forcefully toward Howard. The papers scattered across the floor, painting a very clear picture of his precious legacy. Your golden boy has nearly bankrupted your legacy 3 times in the last 6 years. He has embezzled funds, hidden massive losses, and nearly triggered a federal audit. I am the only reason you are not both standing in a courtroom right now facing fraud charges. Beverly sneered, stepping over the financial documents as if they were trash. Do not exaggerate your importance, Caroline. You punch numbers into a spreadsheet. A trained monkey could do what you do. Jason is the face of the brand. He brings in the vital connections. You are just bitter because you know you could never achieve what he has. What he has is built entirely on my silent labor, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You stole my admission. You stole 6 years of my career. You trapped me here and convinced me I was a failure all so your incompetent son could play CEO. And I would do it again, Beverly stated coldly, stepping right up to me, her eyes flashing with malice. You owe us your life. We fed you, clothed you, and kept a roof over your head. Now pick up these papers, go upstairs, and clean my kitchen before I lose my temper and throw you out on the street with absolutely nothing. She thought the threat of homelessness would break me. She thought I was still the terrified, insecure girl who needed her validation to survive. She expected me to lower my head, apologize for speaking out of turn, and return to my chores. Instead, I reached down, picked up my Harvard acceptance letter, and carefully placed it into my pocket alongside the forged rejection notice. You cannot throw me out, Beverly, I said, looking right through her. Because I am already leaving. Oh, really? Beverly laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. And where exactly will you go? You have no money, no real job history, and no friends. You will be back by tomorrow morning, begging on your knees for us to let you back in. We will see about that, I replied smoothly. I turned my back on them, walked straight to the hall closet, and pulled out my winter coat. I did not pack a suitcase. I did not gather my clothes or my cheap possessions. The only things of value I needed were currently sitting in my pocket. The absolute proof of their deception and the master keys to their crumbling financial empire. If you walk out that door, do not ever think about coming back, Howard called out, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. You are turning your back on your own blood. You are the ones who drew first blood, I said without looking back. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the freezing, relentless rain. I did not take one of the family cars. I walked down the long, winding driveway on foot, the icy water soaking through my shoes. I was 28 years old, walking into the night, with absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning, undeniable sense of purpose. I was not walking aimlessly. I knew exactly where I was going. My first stop was the local police precinct. The fluorescent lights of the local precinct buzzed relentlessly overhead. I walked straight up to the front desk, completely ignoring the puddle of rainwater forming beneath my soaked shoes. The desk sergeant, an older man with tired eyes, looked up from his paperwork and frowned at my disheveled appearance. I reached into my damp cardigan, pulled out the Harvard envelope and the forged rejection letter, and slid them across the scratched, bulletproof glass. I need to file a formal report for federal mail theft and identity forgery, I stated. My voice did not shake. The sergeant examined the documents, his brow furrowing as he checked the faded dates. Miss, this postmark is from 6 years ago. The statute of limitations for mail theft has already expired. There is practically zero chance the district attorney will press charges after this much time has passed. I am not asking you to arrest anyone tonight, I replied, maintaining unwavering eye contact. I am asking you to document the crime. I want an official case number and a stamped police report stating that these documents were withheld and forged by Beverly Hayes. I need the paper trail. He hesitated, clearly wanting to dismiss me, but the absolute icy resolve in my gaze made him sigh and pull a fresh incident report form from his drawer. It took 45 minutes to document every detail. When he handed me the stamped copy with an official police seal, it felt heavier than gold. It was my first piece of ironclad ammunition. By 5 in the morning, I was sitting on a cheap commuter bus, heading straight to Boston. I had used the last $60 in my personal checking account to buy the ticket. I was still wearing the same damp clothes from the night before my hair was a mess, and I had exactly $0 left for a hotel room. I did not care. Every mile that put distance between me and my toxic family felt like shedding a physical weight. I arrived at the Harvard Business School campus just as the morning sun was hitting the iconic red brick buildings. Students my age and many much younger were walking to class with expensive coffees and designer backpacks. In the past, feeling the immense weight of my mother's harsh criticisms, I would have felt intimidated. I would have believed I did not belong among them. Not anymore. I belonged exactly where my intelligence could take me. I marched directly into the main admissions building and approached the front desk. The receptionist gave me a highly skeptical look, taking in my wrinkled clothes and exhausted face. "I need to speak with the director of admissions immediately," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" She asked, her tone dripping with polite condescension. "The director's schedule is completely full until next month. Tell him Caroline Hayes is here regarding a stolen fellowship and a federal case of identity fraud." I instructed, placing my stamped police report directly on her keyboard. "I will wait right here until he has a free minute." I sat in the lobby for 3 grueling hours. I did not check my phone. I did not care how many frantic missed calls were piling up from Jason, who was likely realizing he had no idea how to access the company payroll accounts without me. Finally, a tall, sharp-looking woman in a tailored suit emerged from the back offices. She introduced herself as Sarah, the senior director of admissions, and ushered me into a private conference room. "This is a highly unusual situation, Miss Hayes." She began reviewing the police report and the forged letter. "While we sympathize with your unfortunate family circumstances, our cohorts are selected years in advance. We simply do not honor admission offers from 6 years ago, regardless of the interference you experienced." "I am not here to ask for pity," I replied, opening my tote bag. I pulled out the massive stack of financial ledgers I had printed before leaving my parents' house. I slammed the heavy dossier onto the glass conference table. "I am here to show you what I have been doing with the last 6 years." The director looked taken aback. "What is this?" "This is the unvarnished financial history of a multi-million-dollar medical device company," I explained, tapping the top page. "For 6 years, I have acted as the shadow chief financial officer. I restructured their toxic debt, negotiated with aggressive creditors, and single-handedly saved the firm from bankruptcy 3 separate times. I executed high-level corporate turnarounds while working 80-hour weeks with zero pay and zero recognition. I did not just read about crisis management in a textbook. I lived it, and I won." The director slowly pulled the dossier toward her, her eyes scanning the complex spreadsheets. The ruthless debt restructuring plans and the aggressive tax deferment strategies I had authored. The silence in the room stretched on for several minutes. Suddenly, the door to the conference room opened. An older gentleman with silver hair and a sharp, calculating gaze walked in. I recognized him instantly from the portraits in the lobby. It was Dean Carter, a billionaire alumnus, and one of the most powerful private equity titans in the country. He had apparently been listening from the adjacent office. He picked up one of my restructuring reports, his eyes flying over the numbers. He let out a low whistle. "You executed a hostile debt rollover against a primary creditor without triggering a default," he asked, looking at me with genuine surprise. "I leveraged a loophole in their initial lending contract." I answered without missing a beat. "It forced them to renegotiate the interest rate or risk losing their priority claim." Dean Carter dropped the paper back onto the table and looked at the admissions director. "We teach theoretical ruthlessness in our classrooms," he said, gesturing toward me. "This young woman has been practicing it in the trenches for 6 years. We would be absolute fools not to claim her." He turned his piercing gaze to me. "The school will reinstate your admission for the upcoming cohort under the Special Circumstances Clause, and you will not have to worry about the lost fellowship. I am personally funding your tuition through my private foundation." I stood up, shaking his hand with a firm, unyielding grip. The scared, isolated girl from Connecticut was officially dead. The corporate shark had just been born. Over the next 6 years, I did not just survive Harvard, I dominated it. I graduated at the top of my cohort and immediately secured a position at one of the most ruthless private equity firms in New York City. I worked relentlessly, climbing the ranks from associate to senior partner with brutal efficiency. I built my own empire entirely severed from my past. During those 6 years, I never spoke to my parents. I ignored every holiday card and blocked every phone number. Through the grapevine, I heard that Beverly and Howard were still parading around their country club, telling anyone who would listen that I was a runaway failure who could not handle the pressure of the real world. They bragged endlessly about Jason's position as CEO, blissfully unaware that without my constant intervention, his company was slowly bleeding to death. I let them talk. I let them live in their comfortable, arrogant delusion. I knew that revenge was a dish best served absolutely freezing cold. Now, at 34 years old, I sat behind the expansive desk of my Manhattan corner office. The skyline of the city stretched out behind me, a testament to everything I had conquered. My assistant knocked softly before entering, carrying a thick manila folder. "Boss," she said, setting the file down in front of me. "We just received a desperate acquisition request from a medical device company in Connecticut. They are on the verge of total bankruptcy and are begging for a buyout to avoid foreclosure." I picked up the file and flipped it open. The logo of my father's company stared back at me. Jason's signature was at the bottom of the distress plea. I leaned back in my leather chair and allowed a slow, razor-sharp smile to spread across my face. The prey had just walked straight into the trap. 2 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Hartford Ritz-Carlton was transformed into a desperate, glittering monument to financial ruin disguised as elite corporate success. Hayes Medical Solutions was bleeding out from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. Yet Jason had decided to burn through the absolute last of their liquid capital to throw a spectacular fundraising gala. He had rented the most expensive hall in the city. A massive crystal chandelier cast a warm, golden glow over 50 circular tables draped in imported silk linens. A live string quartet played classical arrangements in the corner, their music completely drowned out by the hollow, echoing chatter of Connecticut's upper crust. Jasmine stood near the towering ice sculpture at the center of the room, playing her role with terrifying precision. She wore a floor-length custom-beaded emerald gown that hugged her figure, her neck wrapped in a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew for a fact was heavily financed on a high-interest credit line. As a luxury realtor, she treated the room like her own personal hunting ground. She floated between groups of local politicians and wealthy hospital administrators, flashing her brilliant practiced smile. She laughed loudly, placing a manicured hand on the arm of a local surgeon, projecting the flawless image of a woman who had the world at her fingertips. She needed everyone to believe that she and Jason were the ultimate untouchable power couple. Behind the facade, the reality was entirely different. Jason was currently hiding near the heavy velvet curtains by the service entrance, sweating profusely through his bespoke tuxedo. His face was pale, his eyes darting frantically around the room as he continuously checked his expensive watch. He looked less like a titan of industry and more like a terrified child waiting for the principal. A young, terrified-looking man in a cheap suit scurried over to Jason. It was Todd, the woefully incompetent junior accountant they had hired to replace me. Todd was clutching a clipboard against his chest like a shield. "Mr. Hayes," Todd whispered, his voice shaking visibly, "we have a massive problem. The head caterer is threatening to pull the main course. The final wire transfer for the Wagyu beef and champagne just bounced. The bank flagged the account for insufficient funds." Jason's jaw clenched so hard, a vein throbbed in his neck. "What do you mean it bounced? I told you to pull the money from the operational expense account." "The operational account is completely empty, sir," Todd stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The vendors from last month initiated auto drafts this morning. We are entirely overdrawn. If we do not provide a valid credit card right now, they are going to stop serving the food and the guests will notice." Jason aggressively grabbed Todd by the collar of his cheap suit, pulling him into the shadow of the velvet curtains. "Listen to me very carefully," Jason hissed, panic rendering his voice sharp and ragged. "Vanguard Investment Group is sending their senior partner here tonight. If Vanguard does not sign the acquisition papers, this company is dead and we are both going to federal prison. Use the emergency corporate card." "It is maxed out, sir," Todd whimpered. "Then pull the funds from the employee healthcare escrow account," Jason ordered coldly. "Do it right now. Move the money, pay the caterer, and keep the champagne flowing. When Vanguard buys us out tomorrow morning, we will quietly replace the escrow funds and no one will ever know. Do not fail me, Todd." As Todd scurried away to commit yet another corporate felony, Beverly glided over to her son. My mother was dressed in a sweeping cream-colored gown, dripping in pearls, looking every inch the wealthy matriarch. She placed a reassuring hand on Jason's shoulder, completely oblivious to the criminal panic attack he was currently having. "Stop sweating, Jason," Beverly commanded, offering a tight camera-ready smile. "You look nervous. A CEO does not look nervous. You are the face of the Hayes legacy. Everything is perfect. I was just speaking with the hospital board members, and they are completely enamored with our new product line." "Mom Vanguard is not here yet," Jason muttered, running a shaky hand through his styled hair. "The buyout is the only thing keeping us afloat. If they back out, the employee pension fraud is going to surface by the end of the quarter. I cannot go to jail." "Nobody is going to jail." Beverly snapped her grip on his shoulder, tightening painfully. "Vanguard confirmed they are sending their top executive to finalize the paperwork. They want this deal. You just need to smile, shake their hand, and project absolute dominance. We are Hayes. We do not fail." Jasmine sashayed over to join them, handing Jason a fresh glass of champagne. "Your mother is right," Jasmine said, her dark eyes flashing with fierce ambition. "I just told the Reynolds family that we are buying a summer home in the Hamptons next month. We have to maintain the illusion of overwhelming success. Wealth attracts wealth, Jason. The moment Vanguard walks through those double doors, you offer them. The world get the signature, and we are saved." Howard stood a few feet away, swirling a glass of scotch, silently enabling the entire disaster. He nodded along with his wife and daughter-in-law, choosing the comfort of denial over the harsh reality of his son's absolute incompetence. They were standing on a house of cards rigged with dynamite, convincing themselves they had built a fortress. They truly believed they had buried their sins, hidden their debts, and completely erased the daughter they had exploited for 6 years. They thought tonight was their triumphant coronation. They had no idea it was actually their execution. The exhaust from the overnight bus plumed into the freezing morning air as I stepped onto the pavement at South Station. Boston was waking up, the sky a bruised purple bleeding into harsh metallic gray. I had not slept a single minute during the 5-hour ride from Connecticut. My clothes were still damp from the rain, my shoes scuffed, and my hands numb from the cold. But inside my cheap canvas tote bag rested the heaviest, most valuable arsenal I had ever possessed. The freshly stamped police report documenting federal mail theft, the original 6-year-old acceptance letter, the forged rejection notice, and 400 pages of master financial ledgers that proved I was the shadow architect of my family's medical device company. I walked the 2 miles from the station to the Harvard Business School campus. I could not afford a taxi, and I needed the biting wind to keep me sharp. As I crossed the John W. Weeks Bridge, the iconic red brick buildings of the campus rose up before me. 6 years ago, this view would have intimidated me. 6 years ago, I would have looked at the impeccably dressed students sipping artisanal coffees and felt like a fraud who accidentally slipped through the cracks. Today, I felt absolutely nothing but cold, undeniable ownership. I had paid for my admission with blood, sweat, and 6 years of indentured servitude to my brother Jason's staggering incompetence. I was not here to beg for a spot. I was here to collect a debt. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the main admissions building. The warmth of the lobby hit me sharp and unwelcoming. I marched straight to the front reception desk. A polished, sharply dressed woman in her late 20s looked up from her dual monitors, her eyes immediately snapping to my wrinkled cardigan and wet hair. Her professional smile was entirely devoid of warmth. "Can I help you find somewhere?" she asked, her tone implying I had wandered into the wrong building by mistake. "I need an immediate meeting with the director of admissions," I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet, cavernous lobby. The receptionist let out a soft, patronizing laugh. "I am afraid that is completely impossible. The director's schedule is booked solid for the next 3 weeks, and we do not accept walk-in appointments under any circumstances. If you have questions about the application process, I can direct you to our online portal." I did not blink. I unzipped my tote bag, pulled out the official police report, and slammed it face up onto the polished mahogany desk. The sharp crack made the receptionist flinch. "This is a federal incident report documenting felony mail theft and identity fraud regarding a Harvard Dean Fellowship," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying measured whisper. "My name is Caroline Hayes. You are going to pick up your phone, call the director, and tell her that a federally documented victim of admission fraud is standing in her lobby. I am not leaving this desk until I am seated in a conference room. The receptionist stared at the police seal, the color draining from her face. Without another word, she picked up her phone and dialed an extension. Less than 5 minutes later, a formidable woman in a tailored charcoal suit emerged from the double doors behind the desk. She introduced herself as Director Mitchell. She did not offer a comforting smile, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. She led me down a long hallway into a private glass-walled conference room and closed the door firmly behind us. Miss Hayes, Director Mitchell began, taking a seat across from me. I reviewed the police report copy you handed my receptionist along with the documents you claim are a 6-year-old acceptance letter and a forged decline notice. While I am genuinely horrified by what your family has done to you, Harvard Business School has strict protocols. Cohorts are locked in years in advance. We simply cannot honor a fellowship or an admission offer from over half a decade ago. I am deeply sorry for your personal tragedy, but there is nothing the university can do. I did not come here to share a personal tragedy, Director Mitchell, I replied smoothly. And I certainly did not come here to ask for your pity. I came here to show you my resume. Director Mitchell raised an eyebrow. Your resume? I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the massive 400-page stack of master financial ledgers. I dropped the heavy binder onto the glass table. It landed with a definitive heavy thud. For the past 6 years, I have served as the uncredited, unpaid chief financial officer for a multi-million-dollar medical device manufacturer, I stated, pushing the binder across the table toward her. The CEO of that company, my brother, is a financial liability who nearly bankrupted the firm 3 separate times. He engaged in reckless acquisitions, took on predatory corporate loans, and completely mismanaged the supply chain logistics. I am the sole reason the company is currently solvent. Director Mitchell looked at the massive stack of confidential corporate financials, her skepticism warring with curiosity. You expect me to believe you managed a corporate turnaround on your own? I expect you to read the data, I challenged. Open to page 42. You will see a hostile debt rollover I executed against a primary creditor. They tried to force a default to seize our manufacturing assets. I leveraged a technical loophole in their initial lending contract, forcing them to either renegotiate the interest rate down by 4% or lose their priority claim entirely. I secured that renegotiation at 3 in the morning from my childhood bedroom, while simultaneously managing an audit. Director Mitchell slowly opened the binder. Her eyes tracked down the complex spreadsheets, moving from the aggressive debt restructuring plans to the ruthless tax deferment strategies I had authored. The silence in the room grew heavy. Turn to page 89, I commanded, leaning forward. That is the quarterly report where I identified a phantom leak in the operational budget. My brother was siphoning funds for personal expenses. I created a shadow ledger to track the missing capital, then aggressively shorted our underperforming assets to cover the margin calls before the board of directors could trigger an investigation. I executed high-level, cutthroat corporate crisis management while working 80-hour weeks with 0 pay and 0 equity. Director Mitchell was no longer looking at my wet clothes or my messy hair. She was staring at the numbers, her expression transforming into absolute, undeniable shock. The financial maneuvers I had executed were flawless, brutal, and brilliantly calculated. You teach theoretical ruthlessness in your classrooms, I said, leaning back in my chair and holding her gaze. You teach case studies on corporate survival and hostile negotiations. I have not been reading case studies, Director. I have been living them in the trenches. I have more practical, high-stakes merger and acquisition experience than any candidate currently sitting in your incoming cohort. I am not asking you to honor a 6-year-old favor. I am telling you that you are looking at the most lethal financial asset to ever walk through your doors, and you would be making a monumental mistake to let me walk out. Director Mitchell slowly closed the binder, her hands resting flat on the cover. She looked at me for a very long time, the air in the conference room crackling with tension. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could formulate a response, the heavy glass door of the conference room swung open. A distinguished man with sharp features and a commanding presence stepped into the room. He had clearly been listening from the adjacent office. I did not know his name yet, but the way Director Mitchell immediately stood up signaled that this man held absolute power. The real negotiation was about to begin. The man did not bother with pleasantries. He walked directly to the table, his eyes fixed entirely on me, and picked up the heavy binder of financial ledgers. Director Mitchell remained standing, her posture rigid. "My name is Dean Carter," the man said, his voice a low, resonant baritone commanding immediate obedience. I recognized the name instantly. He was a billionaire alumnus, the primary benefactor of this building, and a legendary figure in private equity. He slowly turned the pages of my restructured debt portfolios. "You completely bypassed the oversight committee on this merger," he noted, tapping a specific column. "Highly illegal if you were officially employed. Brilliant since you technically did not exist on their payroll. You operated as a ghost, making life-or-death corporate decisions without leaving a single fingerprint." "I left results," I corrected him smoothly, "and I ensured the survival of an asset that had no business remaining solvent." Carter closed the binder. He looked at Director Mitchell. "Mitchell, find her a seat in the upcoming cohort. Make it happen today." Director Mitchell hesitated, her commitment to protocol warring with his undeniable authority. "Dean Carter, the incoming class is locked. The fellowship funds have already been fully dispersed. We cannot simply bypass the financial framework." "I am bypassing it," Carter stated flatly. He turned his piercing gaze back to me. "The university will reinstate your admission under the Special Circumstances Clause. As for the financial blockade, you will not have to worry about your stolen fellowship. I am personally covering your full tuition through my private foundation. Consider it an early investment in a highly lucrative future asset." I stood up, extending my hand across the glass table. "You will not regret this investment." He shook my hand, his grip matching my iron resolve. "I never make bad investments, Caroline. Welcome to Harvard." The scared, isolated girl who had walked out into the freezing rain was officially dead. The corporate predator had just been born. What followed was a 6-year masterclass in absolute relentless domination. I did not just survive Harvard Business School, I conquered it entirely. While my privileged classmates attended networking mixers and luxury ski trips, I spent every waking hour analyzing market trends, dissecting failed mergers, and building a terrifyingly sharp financial acumen. I graduated at the top of my cohort, leaving a trail of shattered grading curves in my wake. I immediately secured a position at Vanguard Investment Group, one of the most ruthless private equity firms in Manhattan. I started as an associate, working 100-hour weeks, fueled by black coffee and the burning desire to become untouchable. Within 2 years, I made vice president. 2 years after that, I seized the title of managing director. I was known in the financial district as the executioner, the woman who could walk into a failing corporation, slice away the dead weight, and turn a massive profit before the ink on the contract even dried. While I was building an empire of glass and steel in New York, my family was building an empire of lies in Connecticut. I kept tabs on them through industry alerts and public filings, but I never once reached out. Through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, I heard the elaborate, pathetic narratives Beverly and Jason were spinning at their exclusive country club dinners. "It is such a tragedy about Caroline." Beverly would sigh over crystal glasses of imported wine, playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch to perfection. "She simply could not handle the pressure of a successful family. She ran away to the city with no money and no plan. We tried to help her, but you cannot save someone who refuses to work hard." "She was always a bit unstable," Jasmine would chime in, adjusting her heavily financed diamond earrings. "Jason offered her a lovely administrative position at his company, but she was entirely ungrateful. Last I heard, she was working some dead-end retail job and living in a tiny apartment. It breaks my heart, but we have to focus on our own children and Jason's growing company." Jason played his part brilliantly, shaking his head with manufactured sorrow while lighting expensive cigars he bought with embezzled funds. "I had to cut her off," he would tell his golf buddies. "She became toxic, a real drain on the family legacy. I have a multi-million-dollar medical device firm to run. I cannot let a runaway failure drag down our brand. I let them talk. I let them paint me as the tragic, incompetent outcast. I let them construct their fragile house of cards completely oblivious to the hurricane gathering just a few hours south. Every time I closed a multi-million-dollar buyout, I thought of Beverly calling me useless. Every time I received a massive performance bonus, I thought of Jason stealing my future to cover his incompetence. They thought they had buried me. They had no idea they had simply planted a seed. My ascent to senior partner at Vanguard was unprecedented. By my 34th birthday, I was sitting behind an expansive mahogany desk in my Manhattan corner office, looking out over a city I had systematically conquered. I wore tailored designer suits that projected absolute authority. I commanded a team of top-tier financial analysts who jumped at my every command. I had amassed a personal fortune that dwarfed my parents' entire net worth combined. I was completely severed from my past, a self-made titan, answering to no one. But the past has a funny way of desperately knocking on your door when it runs out of money. I was reviewing a highly profitable tech acquisition when my office intercom buzzed. My assistant informed me a new distressed asset file had just arrived. A failing medical device company in Connecticut was begging Vanguard for a massive bailout to avoid imminent foreclosure. I leaned back in my leather chair and smiled. My assistant, a sharp young man named David, stepped into my office carrying a thick manila folder labeled Distressed Asset Acquisition. He placed it squarely in the center of my desk, noting the urgency marked on the cover. "Boss," David began, his tone strictly professional. "We just received this emergency buyout plea from a mid-sized medical device manufacturer based in Connecticut. They are bleeding cash fast. They need a capital injection by the end of the quarter, or they are facing total liquidation. Their primary creditors are preparing to file for bankruptcy proceedings next week." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the mahogany surface of my desk. "What is the valuation?" "They claim they are worth $30 million, but their internal ledgers are a complete mess," David reported, opening the folder. "Our preliminary analysis shows massive unaccounted overhead, suspicious operational expenses, and a severe supply chain breakdown. They are essentially begging Vanguard to acquire them and assume their debts to keep them afloat." I leaned forward, pulling the folder toward me. The glossy embossed logo on the cover page stared back at me. Hayes Medical Solutions. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and electric, rush through my veins. The name on the emergency plea belonged to my father, Howard Hayes. But the frantic, messy signature at the bottom of the buyout request belonged entirely to Jason. I spent a long moment tracing the jagged lines of my brother's signature. He was drowning. The company I had single-handedly kept alive for 6 years had finally succumbed to his staggering incompetence once I was gone. He had driven our family's legacy straight into the ground, just as I always knew he would. And now, terrified of prison and public humiliation, he had come crawling to the largest private equity firm in Manhattan, completely unaware that he was handing his severed head directly to the sister he threw away. "David," I said softly, never breaking eye contact with Jason's signature, "cancel my afternoon meetings. All of them." David frowned slightly. "Even the conference call with the tech firm in Silicon Valley. They are expecting your final approval on the merger." "Reschedule it for Monday," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "I need to review this file immediately. I will personally handle the Hayes acquisition." "Understood," David replied, turning to leave. "Do you want me to assign an associate to draft the preliminary buyout terms?" "No," I answered, snapping the folder shut. "I will draft the terms myself. I want this company stripped down to its studs. We are going to execute a full hostile takeover, and we are going to do it publicly. I want total ownership of their assets, their patents, and their debt. By the time I am finished, Hayes Medical Solutions will cease to exist." David paused at the door, catching the undeniable edge in my voice. He had seen me dismantle corporations before, but he had never seen me take it personally. He nodded smartly and closed the door behind him. I swiveled my leather chair around to face the sprawling Manhattan skyline. The city below moved with a chaotic, relentless energy, but inside my office everything was perfectly still. I opened the folder again and began to systematically dissect Jason's pathetic financial reports. It was worse than I had anticipated. Jason had not just mismanaged the company, he had actively looted it. He had taken out massive high-interest loans against the company's manufacturing equipment to fund his personal lifestyle. There were obvious sloppy transfers from the operational budget to shell accounts that I immediately recognized as funding sources for Jasmine's luxury real estate ventures. He was using the company as a personal piggy bank while the employees faced impending layoffs. But the most damning piece of evidence was hidden in a secondary ledger attached to the employee pension fund. Jason had siphoned over $1 million directly from the retirement accounts, attempting to cover a disastrous margin call on a failed investment. It was blatant, undeniable federal fraud. I picked up a red pen and circled the fraudulent pension transfer. My brother was not just a failure, he was a criminal facing significant prison time. I spent the next 3 hours drafting the most aggressive, suffocating buyout contract Vanguard had ever produced. I designed the terms to ensure that Jason and my parents would receive absolutely no financial compensation from the acquisition. They would walk away with zero equity, zero severance, and zero dignity. The contract required full disclosure of all internal financials, meaning Jason's embezzlement would be legally exposed the moment he signed the paperwork. I finished the draft and hit print. The heavy legal document slid from the machine, holding the power to annihilate my family's perfect facade. I picked up my desk phone and dialed David's extension. David, get the legal team to finalize this contract immediately. I want it ironclad by tomorrow morning. And tell the partners that I am taking point on the Hayes acquisition. Will do, boss, David confirmed. How do you want to proceed with the client? Should I schedule a meeting here at the office? I smiled a slow, predatory grin that did not reach my eyes. No. Let them stew for a bit. They are desperate, which means they are going to do something stupid to try and impress us. Keep an eye on their corporate accounts. Let me know the second they make a move. My prediction proved accurate less than 48 hours later. I was reviewing a separate portfolio when David knocked rapidly and entered without waiting for a response. He looked alarmed. Boss, you need to see this, he said, handing me a printout of an upcoming corporate event in Connecticut. I looked at the glossy flyer. It was an invitation to an exclusive fundraising gala hosted by Hayes Medical Solutions at the Hartford Ritz-Carlton. The event was billed as a celebration of future innovations, promising a night of luxury networking and high-level investment opportunities. They are throwing a party, I said, my voice dangerously calm. They are literally facing bankruptcy next week, and they are throwing a massive catered gala at the Ritz. It gets worse, David added, pointing to a highlighted financial alert on his tablet. I flagged their corporate accounts like you asked. They just initiated a massive wire transfer to cover the venue deposit, the catering, and the entertainment. They drained the last of their liquid capital to pay for this event. They are completely tapped out. I stared at the flyer. Beverly and Jason were playing their classic game. They were projecting an illusion of immense wealth and success to hide the fact that they were drowning. They were hoping that Vanguard would see a thriving, powerful company at this gala and sign the buyout, blindly saving them from the consequences of their own actions. They were throwing a party with stolen money to impress the executioner. They listed a VIP table specifically reserved for the Vanguard representative, David noted, watching my reaction carefully. Do you want me to decline the invitation? Absolutely not, I said, standing up and smoothing my tailored blazer. Accept the invitation immediately. Tell them Vanguard's senior partner will be attending personally to finalize the acquisition. David looked surprised. You are going to Connecticut? I'm going to attend a funeral, I replied, slipping the finalized acquisition contract into my briefcase. And I am going to be the one delivering the eulogy. I instructed David to arrange a town car and ensure my security team was on standby. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city one last time before leaving. 6 years ago, I walked away from that toxic house with nothing but the clothes on my back and a forged rejection letter in my pocket. Tomorrow night, I was returning as the most powerful person in the room, holding the keys to their complete and utter destruction. The game was finally ending. 2 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Hartford Ritz-Carlton was transformed into a desperate, glittering monument to financial ruin disguised as elite corporate success. Hayes Medical Solutions was bleeding out from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. Yet Jason had decided to burn through the absolute last of their liquid capital to throw a spectacular fundraising gala. He had rented the most expensive hall in the entire city. A massive crystal chandelier cast a warm golden glow over 50 circular tables draped in imported silk linens. A live string quartet played classical arrangements in the corner, their music completely drowned out by the hollow, echoing chatter of Connecticut's upper crust. Wait staff in crisp white uniforms glided seamlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with caviar and truffles. Every single detail was meticulously designed to scream unlimited prosperity. Jasmine stood near the towering ice sculpture at the center of the room, playing her role with terrifying precision. She wore a floor-length custom-beaded emerald gown that hugged her figure perfectly, her neck wrapped in a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew for a fact was heavily financed on a high-interest credit line. As a luxury realtor, she treated the room like her own personal hunting ground. She floated gracefully between groups of local politicians, venture capitalists, and wealthy hospital administrators, flashing her brilliant, practiced smile. She laughed loudly, placing a manicured hand on the arm of a prominent local surgeon, projecting the flawless image of a woman who had the world at her fingertips. She needed everyone in that room to believe that she and Jason were the ultimate, untouchable power couple. She loudly boasted about a fictional portfolio of beachfront properties she was allegedly developing, effortlessly weaving lies to trap potential clients in her web of fake prestige. Behind the glittering facade, the reality was entirely different. Jason was currently hiding near the heavy velvet curtains by the service entrance, sweating profusely through his bespoke tuxedo. His face was a sickly pale shade of gray, his eyes darting frantically around the room as he continuously checked his expensive watch. He looked less like a titan of industry and more like a terrified child waiting to be sent to the principal's office. A young, terrified-looking man in a cheap suit scurried over to Jason. It was Todd, the woefully incompetent junior accountant they had hired to replace me. Todd was clutching a clipboard against his chest like a protective shield, his breathing ragged and uneven. "Mr. Hayes," Todd whispered, his voice shaking visibly. "We have a massive problem. The head caterer is threatening to pull the main course. The final wire transfer for the Wagyu beef and the vintage champagne just bounced. The bank flagged the corporate account for insufficient funds." Jason's jaw clenched so hard, a thick vein throbbed violently in his neck. "What do you mean it bounced? I specifically told you to pull the money from the operational expense account." "The operational account is completely empty, sir," Todd stammered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "The supply vendors from last month initiated auto drafts this morning. We are entirely overdrawn. If we do not provide a valid credit card right now, they are going to stop serving the food, pack up their equipment, and walk out. The guests will notice immediately." Jason aggressively grabbed Todd by the collar of his cheap suit, roughly pulling him into the dark shadow of the velvet curtains. "Listen to me very carefully," Jason hissed, raw panic, rendering his voice sharp and ragged. "Vanguard Investment Group is sending their senior partner here tonight. If Vanguard does not sign the acquisition papers, this company is completely dead, and we are both going to federal prison. Use the emergency corporate card." "It is maxed out, sir," Todd whimpered, avoiding eye contact. "Every single card is declined." "Then pull the funds from the employee healthcare escrow account," Jason ordered coldly, his moral compass completely shattered by desperation. "Do it right now. Move the money, pay the caterer, and keep the champagne flowing at all costs. When Vanguard buys us out tomorrow morning, we will quietly replace the escrow funds, and no one will ever know. Do not fail me, Todd." As Todd scurried away to commit yet another severe corporate felony on his boss's behalf, Beverly glided over to her son. My mother was dressed in a sweeping cream-colored gown dripping in genuine pearls, looking every inch the wealthy aristocratic matriarch. She placed a reassuring heavy hand on Jason's shoulder, completely oblivious to the criminal panic attack he was currently experiencing. "Stop sweating, Jason," Beverly commanded, offering a tight camera-ready smile to the room at large. "You look nervous." "A CEO does not look nervous. You are the face of the Hayes legacy. Everything is proceeding perfectly. I was just speaking with the hospital board members, and they are completely enamored with our new product line." "Mom Vanguard is not here yet," Jason muttered, running a shaky hand through his meticulously styled hair. "The buyout is the absolute only thing keeping us afloat. If they back out, the employee pension fraud is going to surface by the end of the quarter. I cannot go to jail." "Nobody is going to jail." Beverly snapped her grip on his shoulder, tightening painfully. "Vanguard confirmed they are sending their top executive to finalize the paperwork. They want this deal. You just need to smile, shake their hand, and project absolute dominance. We are Hayes. We do not fail." Jasmine sashayed over to join them, gracefully handing Jason a fresh glass of champagne. "Your mother is right," Jasmine said, her dark eyes flashing with fierce, blinding ambition. "I just told the Reynolds family that we are buying a summer home in the Hamptons next month. We have to maintain the illusion of overwhelming success. Wealth attracts wealth, Jason. The moment Vanguard walks through those double doors, you offer them the world, get the signature on the dotted line, and we are saved." Howard stood a few feet away, swirling a heavy pour of scotch in a crystal tumbler, silently enabling the entire disaster. He nodded along with his wife and daughter-in-law, choosing the pathetic comfort of denial over the harsh reality of his son's absolute incompetence. They were standing on a fragile house of cards, rigged with high-grade dynamite, fiercely convincing themselves they had built an impenetrable fortress. They truly believed they had buried their terrible sins, hidden their mountainous debts, and completely erased the devoted daughter they had maliciously exploited for 6 years. They thought tonight was their triumphant, glorious coronation. They had absolutely no idea it was actually their public execution. I stepped out of the back of my chauffeured matte black town car, the crisp evening air of Connecticut instantly biting at my cheeks. The valet at the Hartford Ritz-Carlton rushed forward to open the heavy glass doors for me, his eyes momentarily widening as he took in my appearance. I handed him my cashmere overcoat, revealing a razor-sharp midnight blue tailored suit that cost more than my parents' first mortgage. I wore no flashy oversized jewelry to prove my worth. I only wore a pair of subtle, flawless, emerald-cut diamond earrings. I did not need excessive debt-funded diamonds to project authority. Real power did not need to shout for attention. Real power simply entered the room and demanded all the oxygen. I walked past the crowded registration desk in the lobby, completely ignoring the frantic event staff holding their velvet-roped clipboards. I did not need to check in. I owned the room before I even crossed the threshold. The heavy mahogany doors to the grand ballroom were propped wide open, and the soaring melodic sound of the string quartet drifted out into the corridor. I stepped into the ballroom, my heels clicking methodically against the imported marble entryway. I paused for a single moment, taking in the absurd, desperate opulence of the gala. It was incredibly pathetic. It was exactly the kind of flashy, hollow garbage Beverly and Jason mistook for genuine class. I signaled a passing waiter with a slight raise of my hand. He immediately rushed over, and I took a crystal flute of champagne from his silver tray. I took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes scanning the sea of Connecticut elite until I found my targets. It did not take long for them to spot me. Jasmine was the very first to see me. She was standing near the towering melting ice sculpture, right in the middle of laughing obnoxiously at a joke made by a city councilman. Her gaze drifted lazily across the room and locked directly onto mine. The artificial laughter died instantly in her throat. Her face went entirely slack, her dark eyes widening in absolute unadulterated horror. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear a sudden hallucination. When she realized I was actually flesh and blood standing casually in her exclusive VIP investor area, her expression twisted into pure unfiltered rage. She immediately grabbed Beverly's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into the cream silk of my mother's expensive gown. She aggressively pointed a trembling finger in my direction. Beverly turned around, an annoyed reprimand forming on her lips for being grabbed so roughly, but the words evaporated the exact second she saw me standing there. The color completely drained from Beverly's face, leaving her looking old, hollow, and absolutely terrified. I raised my champagne glass slightly in their direction, offering a cold, terrifyingly calm smile. Jasmine did not hesitate for a second. She hiked up the heavy beaded skirt of her emerald gown and marched aggressively across the ballroom floor, Beverly following closely on her heels, like a well-trained attack dog. They maneuvered through the crowd, careful not to bump into any potential investors, until they cornered me near one of the massive floral centerpieces. They positioned their bodies strategically to block me from the view of the important guests, treating me like a dirty secret they needed to sweep under the rug. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jasmine hissed, her voice a venomous low whisper designed to avoid drawing attention. "How did you get past the lobby security? This is a private, exclusive corporate event. We do not allow uninvited garbage to walk off the street and crash our gala." "Good evening to you too, Jasmine," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly composed. I took another leisurely sip of my drink, looking her up and down with calculated indifference. "I am just enjoying the champagne, though knowing Jason's current credit score, I am genuinely surprised you are not serving sparkling apple juice in plastic cups." Jasmine's eyes flared with blinding fury. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here after disappearing for 6 years. You are an unemployed runaway failure. You abandoned this family when we needed you, and now you show up looking for a handout." Beverly finally stepped forward, her chest heaving with deep indignation. She looked me up and down, taking in my tailored suit and polished appearance, but her blinding arrogance refused to let her see the truth. She only saw the submissive 28-year-old girl she had thrown out into the freezing rain. "Are you homeless, Caroline?" Beverly sneered, her tone dripping with absolute disgust and manufactured superiority. "Did you finally realize you cannot survive in the real world on your own? Did you run out of money and come crawling back to beg for your old bedroom? Because I promise you that room has been converted into a massive closet for Jasmine's shoes. You have absolutely nothing here. You are nothing." "I'm not here to ask for anything, Beverly," I said, staring directly into her eyes without blinking, letting the ice in my voice freeze her in place. "I am here to finish what we started 6 years ago when you decided to play God with my future." "I am calling security right now," Jasmine snapped aggressively, waving her hand toward a large, broad-shouldered guard standing near the main entrance. "I am going to have you physically dragged out of here and thrown onto the pavement where you belong. You are a disgruntled former employee trespassing on a multi-million-dollar corporate function, and I will have you arrested." The security guard saw Jasmine's frantic waving and immediately began marching across the ballroom floor toward us. Beverly crossed her arms, a triumphant, cruel smirk finally returning to her face as she anticipated my public humiliation. She expected me to panic. She expected me to beg for a chance to stay, or to turn around and run away in tears, just like I used to do when I was younger. I did not move a single inch. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely unbothered. I watched the guard approach, knowing that in just a few short minutes, the dynamic of this entire room was going to violently invert. They thought they were throwing out a pathetic beggar. They did not realize they were trying to evict the very person who was about to own the building, the company, and their entire pathetic existence. Before the broad-shouldered security guard could close the final few feet between us, a frantic blur of motion caught my peripheral vision. My father Howard suddenly materialized from the dense crowd of oblivious wealthy guests. He practically threw himself between me and the approaching guard, his hands raised in a desperate, placating gesture. He looked absolutely terrified. The pristine tailoring of his expensive tuxedo could not hide the fact that he was sweating profusely, his collar noticeably damp against his neck. "It is fine, it is fine," Howard stammered, waving the security guard away with frantic, jerky motions. "There is no need for a scene. She is family. I will handle this. Please just return to your post." The security guard hesitated, glancing over Howard's shoulder toward Jasmine. Jasmine scowled, her arms tightly crossed over her emerald gown, but she offered a sharp, singular nod. She was perfectly willing to let my father do the dirty work of disposing of me, provided it was done quietly and without drawing the attention of the surrounding investors. The guard stepped back, though he remained close by, his eyes locked on me like I was a dangerous intruder waiting to strike. Howard turned to face me. He reached out, his hands visibly shaking, and attempted to grip my elbow to physically steer me away from the ice sculpture and toward the heavily draped service doors at the back of the ballroom. I did not yield. I planted my heels firmly into the marble floor and locked every muscle in my body. His grip slid awkwardly off the smooth wool of my midnight blue sleeve. He could not move me a single inch. I was no longer the submissive, obedient daughter who bent to his cowardly will. I was an immovable object, and he was a man entirely devoid of real strength. "Caroline, please?" Howard begged, his voice dropping to a harsh, reedy whisper. He leaned in close, bringing with him the sharp, sour scent of aged scotch and pure, unadulterated fear. "You cannot be here. You do not understand the magnitude of what is happening tonight." I remained perfectly still. I brought the crystal champagne flute to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the chilled liquid wash over my tongue, keeping my eyes locked dead onto his. My silence was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that I dropped squarely onto his trembling shoulders. Howard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He glanced over his shoulder, checking the main doors of the ballroom. "Jason is completely on edge," he continued, his words spilling out in a pathetic, rapid-fire rush. "He is waiting for the senior partner from the Vanguard Investment Group to arrive. This buyout is the only thing standing between our family and total financial ruin. If Vanguard backs out, we lose the company. We lose the house. We lose everything. If you make a scene tonight, if you embarrass your brother in front of these people, Vanguard will walk away." He was pleading with me to protect the very people who had gleefully destroyed my future. He was asking me to shrink myself, to disappear into the shadows, also his golden boy could continue playing corporate dress-up with stolen funds. When my silence stretched on unbroken and entirely terrifying, Howard's panic escalated. He reached inside his tuxedo jacket and frantically pulled out a slim leather wallet. His fingers fumbled with the material, clumsily extracting a small stack of crisp, newly printed $100 bills. He counted out 5 of them. $500. He folded the bills and tried to press them directly into my free hand. "Take this," Howard urged, his eyes wide and pleading. "Take this money. Go out the back door through the kitchen so nobody sees you leave. Buy yourself a hot meal at a nice restaurant. Get a comfortable hotel room for the night. Just please, Caroline, I am begging you. Do not do this to your family. Do not ruin this for Jason. Be the bigger person and walk away." I looked down at the money in his trembling hand, and then I looked back up into his terrified eyes. I did not reach for the cash. I did not blink. I simply let the silence stretch, allowing it to become a living, breathing entity in the space between us. My refusal to speak was tearing him apart. Howard was a man who survived entirely on avoidance and deflection. He needed me to yell. He needed me to cry. He needed me to throw a tantrum so he could categorize me as the hysterical, unstable daughter and justify throwing me out. But my absolute predatory stillness gave him absolutely nothing to work with. It stripped away his excuses and forced him to face the sheer, pathetic reality of what he was doing. He was trying to buy off his own daughter with pocket change to protect a son who was actively committing federal fraud. He was pricing my dignity, my stolen Ivy League education, and my 6 years of unpaid grueling labor at exactly $500. It was the ultimate unforgivable insult, and it cemented every single plan I had meticulously drafted in my Manhattan office. Beverly and Jasmine watched the interaction from a few feet away, their initial smugness slowly morphing into deep, unsettling unease. They could see that Howard's tactic was failing completely. They could see the rigid, commanding way I held myself, and they could see Howard physically shrinking under the weight of my unblinking stare. I was not reacting like the victim they remembered. I was reacting like a judge evaluating a guilty plea. "Caroline," Howard whispered, his voice cracking with desperation. He tried once more to push the folded bills against my palm. "I will send you more tomorrow, I promise. Just tell me how much you need. 10,000, 20,000, whatever it takes to get you back on your feet. Just leave the ballroom before Vanguard arrives." I slowly lowered my champagne flute. I looked at the $500 and a dark, icy amusement flickered in my chest. Howard thought I was a destitute runaway looking for a handout. He had absolutely no idea that my personal net worth could buy and sell his entire failing medical device company 10 times over before breakfast. He had no idea that I was the very Vanguard executive he was so desperately waiting to impress. I let him stand there, his arm awkwardly extended holding the useless cash. I wanted him to feel every agonizing second of his own weakness. I wanted him to absorb the undeniable fact that he had absolutely zero power over me. The music from the string quartet swelled, filling the cavernous ballroom with a frantic rising melody that perfectly matched the escalating tension in the air. "Please," Howard tried one last time, a single bead of sweat rolling down the side of his face. "If you ever loved us, you will turn around and walk out those doors." I took another slow, luxurious sip of my champagne. The crystal rim of the glass caught the light from the massive chandelier overhead, flashing with blinding brilliance. I maintained my terrifying silence, holding my father captive in his own fear. I did not need to say a single word to him. The devastating truth was about to arrive on its own, and it was going to hit him with the force of a freight train. I just had to wait for the main doors to open. The heavy mahogany doors at the far end of the grand ballroom suddenly swung outward with a forceful, synchronized thud that cut cleanly through the melodic sweeping of the string quartet. The ambient chatter of Connecticut's elite immediately dialed down to an expectant murmur. Everyone knew who was scheduled to walk through those doors. The entire gala had been staged for this exact arrival. A delegation of 6 impeccably dressed men and women strode into the glittering hall, moving in a tight, impenetrable formation that practically radiated corporate hostility. At the center of the phalanx was Gregory Pierce, the regional managing director of the Vanguard Investment Group. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit and carried an aura of absolute unyielding authority. Flanking him were top-tier corporate attorneys carrying thick, lockable leather briefcases that contained the complete financial destiny of Hayes Medical Solutions. I watched over my father's trembling shoulder as Jason caught sight of the Vanguard team. The sheer pathetic relief that washed over my brother's pale, sweaty face was almost nauseating to witness. He truly believed his salvation had just arrived. He believed the executioners walking into the room were actually his rescue party. Jason aggressively shoved his way past a group of hospital administrators, nearly knocking over a waiter holding a tray of caviar. He hastily smoothed the lapels of his custom tuxedo, wiped his damp palms on his trousers, and plastered on his most charismatic fake CEO smile. He marched directly toward the Vanguard delegation, projecting an illusion of dominance that was entirely betrayed by the frantic, desperate wideness of his eyes. "Director Pierce!" Jason announced, his voice booming artificially loud to ensure every wealthy investor in the immediate vicinity heard him claiming his prize. He thrust his right hand forward in a bold, sweeping gesture of welcome. "We are so incredibly honored you could make it to our gala tonight. The entire Hayes board has been eagerly anticipating your arrival. If you and your legal counsel will just follow me back to the private boardroom, I have all the acquisition contracts prepared and ready for your immediate signature." Director Pierce did not slow his formidable stride. He did not extend his hand to meet Jason's eager grasp. He did not even offer a polite, perfunctory smile. Pierce simply looked at my brother with the blank clinical detachment of a scientist observing an irrelevant insect on the pavement. Pierce completely bypassed Jason's outstretched hand, stepping around him without breaking his stride or altering his trajectory by a single degree. He left my brother utterly stranded in the dead center of the ballroom floor, his hand hanging awkwardly in the empty air, his desperate smile freezing into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. The surrounding guests fell dead silent, the collective embarrassment radiating outward like a shockwave. Jason spun around his chest, heaving, watching in frantic disbelief as the Vanguard delegation marched straight past him. Director Pierce's sharp gaze swept across the glittering expanse of the ballroom. His eyes bypassed the local politicians, the minor venture capitalists, and the extravagant ice sculptures. He was looking for one specific person. He was looking for his commanding officer. His eyes locked directly onto mine. I remained standing near the towering floral arrangement, holding my crystal champagne flute with loose, relaxed fingers. Howard was still frozen directly in front of me, his hand awkwardly clutching the crumpled $500 he had tried to use to bribe me away. Beverly and Jasmine stood rigidly just a few feet away, watching the Vanguard delegation approach our specific corner of the room. My mother's posture instantly transformed. She mistakenly assumed the Vanguard director was bypassing Jason to pay his respects to the true matriarch and patriarch of the Hayes family. Beverly quickly stepped forward, pushing her shoulders back and lifting her chin, preparing to graciously accept the corporate surrender. She smoothed her cream silk gown and readied her most aristocratic welcoming smile. Jasmine mirrored her, straightening her emerald dress, ready to play the vital role of the powerful luxury real estate mogul, welcoming the new investors to their elite circle. Pierce and his phalanx of attorneys halted abruptly, stopping less than 3 feet from where we stood. Beverly eagerly extended her hand, ready to deliver her grand greeting. Pierce ignored her entirely. He did not look at my mother. He did not acknowledge my father or my sister-in-law. He stepped squarely in front of me. He planted his feet, clasped his hands professionally in front of him, and executed a crisp, deeply respectful bow of his head. It was a gesture of absolute, undeniable corporate subservience. "Senior Partner Hayes," Director Pierce announced, his deep baritone cutting through the deafening silence of the ballroom like a physical blade. "I apologize for our slight delay. Traffic on the interstate was heavily congested." The entire ballroom seemed to instantly lose all its oxygen. Beverly's outstretched hand dropped limply to her side. The aristocratic smile instantly melted off her face, replaced by a look of sheer, paralyzing horror. Jasmine physically staggered backward, her expensive stiletto catching on the marble floor as she grabbed the edge of a cocktail table to keep from collapsing. Howard let out a strangled, breathless wheeze, the $500 slipping from his trembling fingers to land silently on the polished stone floor. I did not break eye contact with Pierce. "Traffic is an excuse for amateurs, Gregory. Vanguard does not tolerate delays." "Understood, senior partner," Pierce replied, instantly accepting the reprimand without a single ounce of defensiveness. He gestured to the lead attorney standing to his left, who immediately unlatched a heavy leather briefcase and withdrew a massive stack of legal documents printed on thick watermarked paper. "The hostile acquisition dossiers have been fully finalized according to your exact uncompromising specifications." Pierce continued, projecting his voice so it carried clearly to the surrounding crowd. "We have legally secured the framework to strip Hayes Medical Solutions of all remaining equity, terminate the current executive board, and absorb their outstanding operational debt under Vanguard's absolute control. The corporate execution is fully prepared." Pierce took a sleek, heavy fountain pen from his inner jacket pocket and held it out to me with profound reverence. "We await your final command, senior partner," Pierce stated, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute loyalty. "Do you wish to sign the termination and total buyout orders right here in the main hall in front of their guests, or would you prefer we move to the boardroom to dismantle them privately?" The silence that followed was apocalyptic. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum that swallowed the entire room whole. Nobody dared to breathe. Nobody dared to move. Jason, who had slowly stumbled his way over from the center of the room, stood entirely frozen just a few feet behind Pierce. His face was a sickly, translucent white. He looked like a man who had just watched his own executioner sharpen the blade. I took the heavy fountain pen from Pierce's outstretched hand. I let the cold metal rest against my fingers, feeling the immense crushing weight of 6 years of silent rage, unpaid labor, and profound betrayal finally culminating into a single lethal weapon. I slowly turned my gaze away from the Vanguard director and looked directly at my mother. Beverly was staring at me as if a terrifying, unrecognizable monster had just torn its way out of her daughter's skin. The illusion of her perfect, untouchable family legacy was currently burning to the ground right before her eyes, and the person holding the match was the very daughter she had maliciously discarded. I offered her a razor-sharp, merciless smile. "Right here is fine," I commanded, my voice ringing out like a judge delivering a death sentence. "I want every single person in this room to watch." Director Pierce snapped his fingers. The phalanx of Vanguard attorneys moved with terrifying efficiency. They descended upon the nearest VIP table, politely but firmly relocating a group of startled hospital administrators. Within 30 seconds, the circular table was completely cleared of its champagne flutes and floral centerpieces. One of the attorneys pulled out the head chair and waited. I walked forward, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. I sat down, crossing my legs, and placed the heavy fountain pen flat against the pristine white tablecloth. The sheer physical dominance of the act anchored me as the absolute center of gravity in the room. Pierce took his place, standing directly behind my right shoulder, a silent, looming sentinel of corporate power. Jason finally unfroze. He stumbled forward, his polished black shoes sliding awkwardly against the marble floor. His chest heaved as he fought to process the catastrophic shift in reality. He reached the opposite side of the table and gripped the back of an empty chair to keep himself from collapsing. The sweat was visibly dripping down his temples, now ruining his carefully styled hair. He looked at me, then at Pierce, then back to me, desperately searching for a lifeline. The arrogant CEO act vanished entirely. In its place, he deployed the only weapon he had left: the family card. He forced a pathetic, trembling smile onto his pale face, trying to project a warmth that did not exist. "Caroline!" Jason stammered, his voice cracking loudly in the silent ballroom. "I cannot believe it is you. Look at you. You are a senior partner at Vanguard. This is incredible. Mom and Dad always knew you were going to do amazing things in the city. We have missed you so much. If we knew you were representing the buyers tonight, we would have rolled out the red carpet for you." I did not smile back. I stared at him with blank, unyielding indifference. The desperate performance was physically revolting to watch. "Come on, Care," Jason pleaded, leaning heavily across the table. His voice dropped into a frantic conspiratorial whisper, hoping the investors nearby could not hear his begging. "You know how hard I have been working to keep Dad's legacy afloat? It has been a rough couple of quarters, but now you are here. This is absolutely perfect. We can keep the acquisition strictly in the family. You can fast-track the buyout, sign the papers, and we can all go celebrate. We can put the past behind us. We are blood right. Family takes care of family." Beverly suddenly rushed forward, her high heels clicking sharply against the floor. She slammed both of her hands onto the table, trying desperately to reclaim her lost authority. Her face was a mask of furious indignation, her pearl necklace rattling against her collarbone. "Caroline, stop this ridiculous display immediately," Beverly ordered, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "You are making a public spectacle of yourself. Put that pen down and come into the hallway with me right now. We will sort out whatever this sick prank is in private. You are not going to humiliate your brother in front of his investors." I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Jason. "Director Pierce?" I said, my voice cutting through Beverly's frantic commands like a scythe. "Is this woman a registered shareholder of Hayes Medical Solutions, or does she hold a seat on the executive board?" "She holds no legal equity or executive position, senior partner," Pierce replied instantly, not breaking his professional, intimidating stance. "Then have security remove her from the negotiation table," I commanded smoothly. "She is interrupting official Vanguard business." Beverly gasped loudly, stepping back as one of the broad-shouldered Vanguard attorneys physically stepped between us, shielding me from her completely. Jasmine stood a few feet away, clutching her emerald gown, her dark eyes wide with mounting terror, as she realized her wealthy lifestyle was rapidly disintegrating right before her eyes. I turned my full attention back to Jason. He was gripping the chair so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. "You want to talk about keeping things in the family, Jason?" I asked, my tone dangerously low and lethal. "You want to talk about fast-tracking a buyout to save your precious legacy and pretend the last 6 years never happened?" I held out my left hand. Without a single word, the lead Vanguard attorney placed a massive, heavily bound dossier directly into my palm. It was 4 inches thick, filled with every financial sin Jason had committed since the day I walked out of their house. I lifted the heavy folder high above the table and slammed it down onto the white silk cloth with absolute brutal force. The deafening crack echoed throughout the entire ballroom, silencing the last remaining whispers in the crowd. Jason flinched violently, taking a rapid step backward. "You do not have a legacy," I stated, tapping the cover of the dossier. "You have a highly toxic, severely mismanaged liability. You came to Vanguard begging for a bailout because you thought you could pass off your fraudulent accounting as a minor operational deficit. You thought you could trick a faceless corporation into assuming your catastrophic, unmanageable debt." "Caroline, please." Jason whined, tears actually welling up in his desperate, panicked eyes. "I am your brother. I made a few mistakes, but I can fix them. Just sign the buyout. Save the company. For me, for Mom and Dad. Do not do this to your own family." I picked up the fountain pen. I looked at the pathetic, sweating man across from me. He was perfectly willing to let me rot in unpaid servitude for years, and now he was groveling for mercy. "Business has no room for scammers, Jason," I declared, my voice echoing with terrifying absolute finality. "I will show everyone why." I reached into my briefcase, pulling out a slim matte black remote. I aimed it at the massive projector screen hanging at the far end of the ballroom, a screen that Jason had intended to use to display his fabricated, optimistic future projections for Vanguard. I pressed a single button. The screen hummed to life, flooding the dim ballroom with stark, glaring white light. Instead of Jason's carefully curated marketing slides, the screen displayed a dense, highly detailed internal financial ledger. The numbers were large, clear, and highlighted in bright, undeniable red ink. The title at the top of the document read, "Hayes Medical Solutions, Internal Audit, Employee Pension Escrow." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd. The hospital administrators, local politicians, and minor investors all leaned forward, their eyes squinting to read the staggering figures. "Jason," I said, my voice projecting effortlessly across the room, carrying the cold, hard weight of absolute certainty. "Let us review your definition of family legacy, shall we?" Jason physically recoiled from the screen as if it were emitting heat. He stumbled backward, knocking into a cocktail table and sending a tray of caviar crashing to the floor. "Turn that off!" he stammered, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. "Caroline, turn that off right now. You do not know what you are looking at. Those numbers are taken completely out of context." "The numbers are incredibly clear," I replied, standing up slowly from my chair at the head table. I kept my eyes locked on him, moving with deliberate, predatory grace. "Over the past 18 months, you have systematically siphoned exactly $1.2 million from the employee pension escrow accounts. You bypassed the standard accounting protocols, utilizing a ghost ledger system that only someone with administrative access could authorize." "That is a lie," Jason shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is lying. She hacked our system. She is a disgruntled, unstable former employee trying to ruin my company." I pressed another button on the remote. The slide advanced, revealing a series of wire transfer receipts. The sending account was clearly labeled as the Hayes Medical Employee Pension Fund. The receiving accounts, however, were not corporate vendors or operational expenses. They were personal offshore LLCs registered under highly familiar names. "The funds did not vanish into the ether, Jason," I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "They went directly into shell accounts registered to J&J Luxury Holdings, an entity completely owned and operated by your wife Jasmine." Jasmine let out a sharp, piercing shriek. She lunged forward, her emerald gown catching on a chair leg, nearly sending her sprawling to the marble floor. "Slander!" she screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "This is absolute slander and defamation. You forged those documents, Caroline. You are insanely jealous of my success, my marriage, and my wealth. You have always been a pathetic, lonely failure trying to drag me down." "Your wealth?" I echoed, offering her a cold, terrifyingly amused smile. "You mean the wealth you stole from the retirement accounts of men and women who have worked for this company for over 20 years? Let us take a closer look at your prestigious luxury lifestyle, Jasmine." I clicked the remote again. The screen shifted to display a meticulously categorized list of expenditures pulled directly from the J&J Luxury Holdings account. The items were staggering in their sheer reckless opulence. $200,000 down payment on a 70-foot yacht. I read aloud, my voice ringing with brutal clarity. $50,000 for custom diamond jewelry, including the very tennis bracelet you are wearing around your neck tonight. $300,000 funneled into a failing luxury real estate development in the Hamptons that you desperately tried to use to inflate your personal brand. The crowd in the ballroom erupted into a chaotic, stunned murmur. The wealthy investors Jasmine had been aggressively networking with just moments ago began physically backing away from her, creating a wide circle of isolation around her and Beverly. The realization that they were standing in a room funded by stolen pension money was hitting the attendees like a physical blow. You funded your entire pathetic facade with the stolen futures of your own employees. I continued, turning my gaze back to Jason. He was leaning heavily against a pillar, clutching his chest, his breathing ragged and shallow. "You bled your father's legacy dry just to buy your wife a few shiny toys and pretend you were a titan of industry. You are not a CEO, Jason. You are a common, desperate thief." Beverly finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. She marched forward, her face flushed a dark, angry purple. She shoved her way past the Vanguard attorneys, determined to protect her golden child at all costs. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "Enough!" Beverly commanded, her voice shrill and echoing with desperate authority. "I will not stand here and listen to you tear down your own brother. You are an ungrateful, malicious brat. We gave you everything. We fed you, clothed you, and tolerated your miserable, depressing presence in our home for years. You owe this family your very existence. Jason made a few minor financial errors, but he is a good man. He is a Hayes. You are nothing but a jealous, vindictive snake trying to bite the hand that fed you." I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely zero pity for the terrified, pathetic woman standing before me. She was clinging to a burning ship, desperately trying to demand obedience from the very iceberg that was sinking it. "I do not owe this family a single solitary thing," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that completely silenced her. "But you, Beverly, you owe me 6 years of my life, and I am here to collect." I turned to Director Pierce, who had been watching the entire spectacle with cold, calculating approval. He gave me a sharp, single nod. The financial execution was complete. It was time for the final, devastating blow. I reached into my briefcase one last time. "You want to talk about the sacrifices this family made for me?" I asked, my voice ringing with absolute, terrifying authority. "Let us talk about the sacrifices you made to ensure I could never leave." I pressed the button on the remote, preparing to show the entire ballroom exactly what kind of monsters were running Hayes Medical Solutions. The financial ruin was just the appetizer. The real destruction was about to begin. "You ungrateful, malicious brat!" Beverly spat, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent ballroom. The pearls around her neck trembled with the force of her indignation. She took a step forward, raising a trembling hand as if to strike me. "We took you in when you had nothing. We fed you, clothed you, and gave you a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us, by hacking our computers and fabricating some ridiculous story about an escrow account. You are insane." The remaining color drained from Howard's face. He reached out to grab Beverly's arm, pulling her back. "Beverly, please stop talking." He pleaded, his voice a cracked, terrified whisper. He looked from me to Director Pierce, recognizing the absolute lethal authority Vanguard wielded. I did not flinch. I let my mother's accusations hang in the air, allowing the sheer pathetic desperation of her lies to settle over the crowd. Fabricating. I repeated the word, rolling off my tongue with cold precision. That is an interesting choice of words, Beverly. I raised the matte black remote and pressed a button. The projector hummed, advancing to the next slide. The screen illuminated with a document that had absolutely nothing to do with Jason's current corporate implosion. It was a scanned copy of an official incident report from the Connecticut State Police dated exactly 6 years ago. The police seal was prominently displayed at the top, along with a bright red stamp marking it as an official federal mail theft complaint. Beverly stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open, the arrogant defiance melting away into utter, paralyzing confusion. "You want to talk about what this family gave me?" I said, my voice projecting effortlessly to the farthest corners of the room. "Let us talk about what you stole from me to ensure I remained your obedient, unpaid servant." I clicked the remote again. A second document appeared next to the police report. It was a high-resolution scan of the cream-colored envelope from Harvard Business School addressed to me alongside the pristine acceptance letter. 6 years ago, I received a full tuition, Dean Fellowship to the Harvard Business School MBA program. I announced, meeting the eyes of the silent investors watching the spectacle unfold. I was 22 years old, working night shifts, and desperate for a way out. I never saw that letter because my mother, Beverly Hayes, intercepted my mail. She locked it in a wooden box at the back of her nightstand and proceeded to watch me suffer through what I believed was a devastating rejection. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the ballroom. Jasmine let out a sharp gasp, taking a panicked step away from her mother-in-law. Jason stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently. But stealing my admission was not enough to guarantee my compliance. I continued pacing slowly across the front of the head table. I pressed the remote one last time. A third document materialized on the screen. It was the forged letter declining my admission printed on Hayes Medical Solutions letterhead. The fake signature at the bottom was starkly highlighted in yellow. To ensure I had absolutely no escape route, Beverly forged a rejection letter claiming critical family obligations required me to stay in Connecticut. I stated, my voice echoing with terrifying clarity. She committed a federal crime to trap me here, forcing me to serve as Jason's unpaid shadow accountant while he played CEO. "That is a lie," Beverly shrieked, though the raw panic in her voice betrayed her completely. "You are making this up. That police report means nothing. It is past the statute of limitations. You cannot prove any of this." "I do not need to prove it to a judge to ruin you," I replied, staring directly at her terrified, crumbling facade. "I already proved it to the director of admissions at Harvard Business School 6 years ago. I proved it to Dean Carter, who reinstated my admission and personally funded my tuition after reviewing this exact police report." I turned my gaze to the Vanguard legal team standing like silent sentinels behind me. "But more importantly, I proved it to Vanguard Investment Group," I said smoothly. "When Vanguard assesses a distressed asset for a hostile takeover, we perform an exhaustive, ruthless background check on the executive board. We investigate every corporate filing, every personal debt, and every shadow account." I looked back at Jason, who was now visibly trembling, sweat dripping from his chin onto his expensive tuxedo shirt. "We also investigate the moral and legal integrity of the founders." I concluded, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "Vanguard does not partner with executives who embezzle from their employees. Vanguard does not acquire companies run by men who finance yachts with stolen pension funds. And Vanguard absolutely does not negotiate with families who commit federal mail fraud to enslave their own children." Howard let out a strangled, pathetic sob. He buried his face in his trembling hands, finally realizing the catastrophic, inescapable magnitude of their destruction. The legacy he had blindly protected at the cost of his daughter's future was currently burning to the ground on a projector screen for all of Connecticut to see. Beverly, however, refused to surrender. She lunged forward again, her eyes wild, her hands curling into claws. "You vicious, ungrateful snake!" Beverly hissed, spit flying from her lips as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "You orchestrated this entire charade just to humiliate us. You have no real power. You're just a glorified accountant holding a grudge." I did not move. I simply looked at Director Pierce. Pierce stepped forward, interposing himself between me and my mother. He did not raise his voice, but the sheer crushing weight of his corporate authority forced Beverly to halt instantly. "Mrs. Hayes," Director Pierce said, his voice cold and devoid of any human empathy, "I strongly suggest you lower your hand. You are currently threatening the senior partner of the Vanguard Investment Group, the sole entity holding the debt that prevents your son from facing immediate catastrophic bankruptcy." Pierce turned slightly, addressing the entire ballroom. "Vanguard officially retracts our preliminary offer to acquire Hayes Medical Solutions under favorable restructuring terms." Pierce announced, his words ringing out like a death sentence. "Senior partner Hayes has drafted a new non-negotiable acquisition contract. We are seizing total operational control. We are assuming all assets and terminating the entire executive board effective immediately. There will be no severance packages. There will be no equity retention for the Hayes family." Jason let out a horrible strangled noise, collapsing onto the nearest empty chair as his knees finally gave out. "Furthermore," Pierce continued, delivering the final killing blow, "Senior partner Hayes has formally submitted the complete internal financial ledgers, including the evidence of the employee pension embezzlement, to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The final syllable of Director Pierce's announcement hung in the dead air of the grand ballroom. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words acted like a physical shockwave, ripping through the crowd of Connecticut's elite. The wealthy hospital administrators, the venture capitalists, and the local politicians instantly began backing away from the head table. They moved with frantic urgency, terrified that simply standing in the proximity of my family would somehow implicate them in federal embezzlement. The prestigious networking gala had instantly transformed into an active crime scene. I stepped forward, taking my place beside Pierce. I looked down at Jason. He was no longer sitting in the chair. He had slid completely off the silk-upholstered seat and was kneeling on the polished marble floor. His bespoke tuxedo jacket was ruined with sweat, and his breathing came in shallow, panicked gasps. "I warned you 6 years ago that your golden boy was going to bankrupt your legacy," I said, directing my voice to Howard and Beverly, who stood paralyzed beside the melting ice sculpture. "You chose to protect his ego instead of the truth. You thought you could cover his incompetence by turning me into a slave. But competence cannot be faked, and math does not care about your family pride. The numbers always tell the truth." I looked back down at my brother. He was clutching his chest, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy mahogany doors, calculating an escape route that did not exist. "There is no way out, Jason," I stated, my tone dropping to a lethal quiet register. "I did not just send a tip to the authorities. I sent a fully indexed cross-reference dossier containing every ghost ledger, every fake invoice, and every offshore wire transfer you authorized. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze all of Hayes Medical Solutions' corporate accounts at exactly 5 o'clock this evening. Your access to the company funds is gone. Your emergency credit lines are dead. You cannot even buy a cup of coffee, let alone a defense attorney." Beverly let out a high, thin wail. Her hands clawed at her pearl necklace, her knuckles white. The aristocratic facade had completely burned away, leaving nothing but an aging, terrified woman facing the absolute destruction of her social empire. "Caroline, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "We will give you the company. We will give you whatever you want. Just retract the files. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You cannot send your own brother to federal prison." "I did not send him anywhere," I replied with chilling indifference. "Jason bought his own ticket to a federal cell the moment he stole from the retirement funds of the people who trusted him. I am simply the one handing the itinerary to the judge." It started as a faint, distant hum. At first, the guests in the ballroom thought it was just the wind outside the Ritz-Carlton, but the sound grew rapidly, sharpening into a piercing, unmistakable wail. Sirens. Multiple sirens approaching fast from the downtown intersection, cutting through the crisp Connecticut night. The flashing reflection of sharp red and blue lights began to pulse against the frosted glass of the ballroom windows. The heavy syncopated rhythm of heavy boots and emergency vehicles pulling up to the main entrance of the hotel vibrated through the floorboards. Jason let out a guttural, agonizing sob. His legs gave out completely, his entire body collapsing onto the cold marble. He curled into a pathetic, trembling ball, his hands gripping his hair as he wept uncontrollably. The arrogant CEO, the golden child who had been handed the world on a silver platter, was reduced to a whimpering mess on the floor of his own extravagant party. Howard fell to his knees beside him, wrapping his arms around his son, burying his face in Jason's shoulder. My father was crying now, too loud, hacking sobs that echoed through the silent watching crowd. He had sacrificed his daughter, his integrity, and his business to protect this exact moment from ever happening. His failure was absolute. Jasmine, however, did not drop to the floor to comfort her husband. She stood rigidly by the table, her eyes wide with a different kind of terror. She looked down at the massive, sparkling diamond tennis bracelet wrapped around her wrist. She looked at her custom-beaded emerald gown. Her gaze swept over the luxurious ballroom, the caviar, the vintage champagne, and the wealthy contacts she had spent all night schmoozing. The brutal reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. The money was gone. The accounts were frozen. The offshore LLCs she used to fund her luxury real estate business were about to be seized as federal evidence. The government was going to strip her of every single asset, every yacht, every car, and every property funded by stolen pension money. Her elite status was completely obliterated. Jasmine slowly turned her head and looked down at the pathetic, sobbing man on the floor. Her dark eyes, which just moments ago had flashed with fierce ambition, were now filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You told me it was handled," Jasmine hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. Jason looked up, his face streaked with tears and sweat. "Jasmine, please, I can fix it. I will talk to the lawyers. I will protect you." "Protect me!" Jasmine screamed, completely losing her mind. She lunged forward, her high heels scraping aggressively against the floor. She raised her right hand and brought it down across Jason's face with a violent, resounding slap. The sharp crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed like a gunshot through the ballroom. Jason recoiled, crying out in pain, holding a shaking hand to his rapidly reddening face. "You incompetent, useless idiot!" Jasmine shrieked, standing over him like a vengeful fury. "You swore to me the Vanguard deal would cover the missing funds. You swore the audits were clean. I put my name on those holding accounts. You dragged me into a federal embezzlement scheme. My real estate license is going to be revoked. I am going to lose everything because you are too stupid to run a simple business." She reached down, grabbed his tuxedo collar, and violently shoved him backward. "I am filing for divorce the second I walk out of this building. I am turning over every email, every text message, and every bank statement you ever sent me to the feds. I am not going to prison for your pathetic mistakes." She ripped the diamond tennis bracelet off her wrist and threw it aggressively at his chest. It bounced off his ruined tuxedo and clattered across the floor. Jasmine turned on her heel, hiking up the skirt of her emerald gown, and stormed toward the service exit, desperate to flee the building before the authorities breached the main doors. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom suddenly burst open. A squad of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with bold yellow lettering marched into the hall. They moved with tactical precision, fanning out to secure the exits. The lead agent held up a heavy stack of sealed warrants, his eyes sweeping the room until he spotted Jason sobbing on the floor. I stood perfectly still, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint the walls of the ballroom. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the crisp, clean air of absolute victory. The execution was flawless. My 6 years of patience had just delivered the ultimate payload. "Take him," the lead agent commanded, pointing directly at my brother. The agents moved forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from their belts. The cold click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Jason's wrists echoed with satisfying finality. The sound effectively severed the last remaining thread of the Hayes family legacy. 2 federal agents hauled my brother roughly to his feet. His custom tuxedo was completely ruined, wrinkled, and stained with sweat and spilled champagne. He looked entirely pathetic, a hollow shell of the arrogant executive who had strutted into the ballroom just an hour prior. Beverly let out a guttural shriek and lunged toward the agents, her cream silk gown twisting around her legs. "You cannot take him," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "He is the CEO. He is my son. There has been a terrible mistake. Unhand him right now." A female agent stepped smoothly into Beverly's path, raising a firm, unyielding hand to block her advance. "Ma'am, step back immediately," the agent ordered, her tone brooking no argument. "Jason Hayes is under arrest for multiple counts of federal embezzlement, wire fraud, and pension theft. Interfering with a federal arrest is a felony. Step back." Howard remained frozen on his knees upon the marble floor, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic ruin unfolding before him. He did not try to reach for his son to offer any comfort. He simply stared blankly at the polished stone, the reality of his cowardice finally crushing him flat. He had enabled this disaster for decades, prioritizing superficial family peace over basic integrity, and now he was paying the ultimate price. Jason twisted his head as the agents began marching him toward the main exit. His tear-streaked face searched the silent, horrified crowd until his eyes found mine. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg for mercy one last time, or to curse my name, but no words came out. I held his gaze with absolute freezing indifference. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched the trash being taken out. By the time the flashing red and blue lights faded down the Connecticut interstate, the real bloodbath was already beginning behind the scenes. I returned to Manhattan the following morning, resuming my position behind my expansive desk at Vanguard. Jasmine, driven entirely by raw, unfiltered self-preservation, did not wait a single minute to launch her counteroffensive. She was a luxury real estate agent whose entire identity and livelihood depended on maintaining a spotless, elite reputation. The moment she fled the Ritz-Carlton through the service doors, she immediately recognized that Jason was a sinking ship, and she had zero intention of drowning with him. Before the sun even rose on Sunday morning, Jasmine was sitting in a sterile interrogation room at the federal building, flanked by two aggressive defense attorneys. She knew the Securities and Exchange Commission had frozen the Hayes Medical Solutions corporate accounts, but she also knew exactly how Jason had structured the offshore shell companies. To avoid federal indictment for her role in receiving stolen pension funds, Jasmine happily turned state's evidence against the very man she had vowed to love, for better or for worse. She handed the federal prosecutors an absolute goldmine of incriminating evidence. She provided them with the encrypted passwords to the J&J Luxury Holdings accounts, forwarded years of highly compromising text messages where Jason explicitly detailed his fraudulent transfers, and surrendered the financial ledgers mapping out the purchase of their yachts and luxury vehicles. She traded her husband's freedom for total immunity. Jasmine did not stop at securing a federal immunity deal. The moment she walked out of the prosecutor's office, she initiated a scorched earth protocol to sever every remaining tie to the Hayes family name. By Monday afternoon, while Jason was still sitting in a sterile concrete holding cell awaiting his arraignment, hearing a process server arrive to hand him emergency divorce papers, Jasmine filed for immediate dissolution of the marriage, citing gross criminal misconduct and financial endangerment. She petitioned for and was granted temporary sole physical and legal custody of their children, successfully arguing that a federally indicted felon posed a massive risk to their well-being. She did not answer a single one of the frantic phone calls my mother placed to her cell phone. Instead, Jasmine returned to the sprawling suburban mansion Jason had purchased with stolen money. She packed 3 massive designer suitcases with her most expensive clothes, gathered her children, and completely emptied a hidden personal emergency fund she had kept entirely separate from Jason's failing empire. Before the bank executives could arrive to post the foreclosure notices on the front door, Jasmine was already boarding a first-class flight to California, vanishing into the wind and stripping Jason of his wife, his children, and his dignity. I sat in my corner office reviewing the detailed intelligence report my assistant David had just handed me. Director Pierce sat across the glass table, sipping a black coffee with a look of deep satisfaction. The Vanguard acquisition of Hayes Medical Solutions was moving forward seamlessly. We had assumed total control of the assets for pennies on the dollar, completely unburdened by the criminal liabilities Jason had created. The legal transition was brutally fast, erasing the family name from the corporate registry permanently. Your brother's bail hearing concluded an hour ago, Pierce noted, setting his coffee cup down on a coaster. The judge denied bail, citing the overwhelming flight risk and the sheer volume of evidence provided by his own wife. He is being remanded to federal custody pending trial. His public defender looked completely out of his depth. A public defender, I repeated, a cold, sharp laugh escaping my lips. The golden child of the Hayes family, the untouchable corporate heir, is being represented by a court-appointed lawyer because his accounts are frozen and his wife took the last of the cash. It is truly poetic. It is a remarkably efficient collapse, Pierce agreed smoothly. He has absolutely nothing left to leverage. No company, no wealth, no family support from his spouse. He is entirely isolated. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling Manhattan skyline. The absolute destruction of my brother's carefully curated life was playing out exactly as I had mathematically projected. For years, Jason had coasted on my stolen labor, believing his own arrogant hype while I suffocated in the background. But the real world did not care about Beverly's twisted maternal preferences. The real world only cared about competence, leverage, and the cold, hard truth of a balanced ledger. Jason was currently sitting in a miserable, freezing federal holding cell, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit instead of a bespoke tuxedo. He finally had to face the suffocating reality of his own sheer incompetence without a single safety net to catch him. He had stolen my future, but I had entirely dismantled his reality. 3 weeks had passed since the catastrophic implosion at the Ritz-Carlton. The fallout had been absolute and devastating. Jason was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, denied bail, and facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Jasmine had finalized her brutal, incredibly swift divorce, secured her immunity deal, and vanished to the West Coast, with her children leaving the wreckage of the Hayes family name burning in her wake. Vanguard had officially absorbed Hayes Medical Solutions, terminated the entire executive board without severance, and successfully rebranded the asset within 10 days. The corporate execution was complete. I was back in Manhattan, operating from the quiet, powerful sanctuary of my penthouse overlooking Central Park. It was a Tuesday evening, raining steadily against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my apartment. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing a new set of financial acquisitions when my building's private concierge buzzed my secure line. "Ms. Hayes." The concierge began, his tone carrying a note of polite hesitation. "There are 2 individuals in the lobby requesting immediate access to your residence. They claim to be your parents, Howard and Beverly Hayes. They do not have an appointment and they appear to be highly distressed. Should I have security escort them out of the building?" I paused, setting my pen down next to the glowing tablet. I had anticipated this exact moment. I knew the bank had initiated the final foreclosure proceedings on their sprawling Connecticut estate the previous Friday. They had absolutely nowhere else to go. "No," I replied, my voice calm and perfectly measured. "Send them up. But have security wait by the elevator doors on my floor. Do not let them wander the hallway." I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my cashmere sweater. I did not rush. I walked slowly to the heavy reinforced mahogany door of my penthouse and waited. A minute later, the private elevator chimed. I opened my door just as Beverly and Howard stepped out. The sight of them was genuinely jarring. The arrogant, untouchable veneer they had worn like armor for my entire life was completely gone. Beverly was not dripping in pearls or wrapped in imported silk. She wore a simple, slightly rumpled trench coat, her hair flat and unstyled. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the skin around them puffy and dark. Howard looked even worse. He seemed to have aged a decade in 3 weeks. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated, and he held a damp, crumpled fedora in his shaking hands. They looked like 2 people who had just survived a shipwreck only to realize the lifeboat was sinking. They stopped a few feet from my door, taking in the sheer, undeniable opulence of my penthouse. The private elevator, the armed security detail standing discreetly in the background, the sprawling view of the Manhattan skyline, visible through the open doorway. It was a brutal physical reminder of the empire I had built entirely without them. "Caroline," Beverly whispered, her voice cracking instantly. She took a tentative step forward, her hands reaching out as if to embrace me. I did not move. I did not invite them inside. I simply stood blocking the threshold, a terrifying, immovable force. "What do you want, Beverly?" I asked, my tone dropping the temperature in the hallway to absolute zero. Beverly flinched, the harshness of her given name hitting her like a physical strike. She looked at Howard, desperate for him to intervene, but my father simply stared at his wet shoes, completely broken. "We have nowhere else to go." Beverly sobbed, tears spilling down her cheeks. The performance was raw, fueled by genuine panic. The bank froze everything. The federal investigators seized the remaining accounts. Jason is gone. The company is gone. They posted the foreclosure notice on the house last week. We have to vacate the property by Friday. We are going to be living on the street, Caroline. "That sounds like a severe personal crisis," I replied smoothly, leaning casually against the doorframe. I failed to see how that involves me. "You are our daughter!" Beverly cried out, the desperation in her voice escalating to a frantic, shrill pitch. "You are our blood. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we are still your family. Please, Caroline, you have the money. We know you do. You work for Vanguard. You are a senior partner. You could buy the house from the bank. You could save it for us. It would be pocket change for you. Please do not let us lose our home." Howard finally found his voice, though it was nothing more than a pathetic, trembling croak. "Caroline, please listen to your mother. We are begging you. We will sign whatever you want. We will apologize publicly. We will do anything. Just help us save the house. It is all we have left." The sheer, staggering hypocrisy of their request hung heavily in the air. 6 years ago, they had deliberately stolen my future. They had trapped me in their home, treating me like unpaid labor, actively ensuring I had no financial independence. They had forged federal documents, lied to my face, and emotionally suffocated me just so their golden child could play CEO. And now, facing the exact same destitution they had tried to enforce upon me, they were on my doorstep begging for salvation. Beverly, completely undone by my terrifying silence, actually dropped to her knees on the expensive carpet of my private hallway. She grabbed the edge of my coat, weeping openly, her dignity entirely shattered. "I am sorry," Beverly wailed, burying her face in her hands. "I am so sorry for everything. For the letter, for Jason, for how we treated you. You are the successful one. You were always the smart one. We were wrong. Please, Caroline, I am on my knees. I am begging my own daughter. Buy the house. Let us stay. We will be quiet. We will never ask for anything again. Just please do not let them throw us out into the cold." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel incredibly small, useless, and pathetic. I watched her grovel at my feet, crying real tears, desperately trying to leverage a maternal bond that had never actually existed. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt absolute freezing clarity. "You want me to buy the house?" I stated, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet hallway. "Yes," Beverly gasped, looking up with a sudden, desperate flicker of hope in her red-rimmed eyes. "Yes, please. You could buy it tomorrow. You could stop the bank. You could save us." I slowly pulled my coat out of her frantic grip. I stood perfectly straight, looking down at both of them with the cold, assessing gaze of an executioner preparing the final strike. "I cannot buy the house tomorrow, Beverly," I said, offering her a slow, razor-sharp smile, "because I already bought it directly from the bank this morning." The words hung in the air, vibrating with a sudden electric tension. For 3 agonizing seconds, Beverly simply stared up at me from the hallway floor, her tear-streaked face frozen in a mask of total incomprehension. Then the meaning of my words finally penetrated her panic. A massive, shuddering gasp of pure relief ripped through her chest. The transformation was instantaneous and entirely grotesque to witness. The weeping, broken woman vanished instantly, replaced by the arrogant, entitled matriarch who believed she had just successfully manipulated her way out of a corner. Beverly scrambled to her feet, her trench coat rustling wildly. She let out a wet, hysterical laugh, throwing her hands up toward the ceiling. Oh, Caroline, I knew it. I knew you would not let us down. She lunged forward, her arms wide open, intending to pull me into a tight, dramatic embrace to seal her victory. You bought the house. You saved us. Howard, do you hear that she bought the estate? We do not have to pack. We do not have to leave. I took a single, precise step backward, ensuring her grasping hands closed around absolutely nothing but empty air. My posture remained rigid, my expression utterly devoid of the warmth she was desperately trying to manufacture. The armed security detail at the end of the hallway shifted slightly, their heavy boots scuffing against the carpet, a silent warning that she was dangerously close to crossing a physical boundary. Beverly stumbled forward, her arms dropping awkwardly to her sides when she realized I was not reciprocating the celebration. Her hysterical laughter died out, replaced by a nervous, faltering smile. Caroline, sweetheart, what is wrong? We can move our things back into the master suite today. We can get the utilities transferred into your name. I will even hire a new cleaning service to prepare the guest rooms. Howard let out a long, shaky breath, removing a handkerchief from his pocket to dab at his sweating forehead. Thank God, he muttered, his voice thick with profound relief. Thank you, Caroline. You have no idea what a nightmare this week has been. We were terrified we would have to sleep in a motel. You really stepped up for the family. I looked at the two of them, genuinely marveling at the sheer depth of their delusion. They truly believed that a single stroke of a pen had erased a lifetime of emotional abuse. They believed money could instantly buy my submission. I want you to think back to a very specific night, Beverly, I said, my voice cutting through their premature celebration like a frozen blade. I want you to think back exactly 6 years ago, to the night you stood in our formal dining room and told me I owed you my life. The night you told me I was useless, plain, and entirely replaceable. Do you remember what the weather was like? Beverly blinked, her nervous smile faltering. Caroline, please, we do not need to hash out the past right now. We are exhausted. It was raining. I continued, completely ignoring her pathetic attempt to deflect. It was freezing, torrential rain. I walked out of your heavy mahogany front door with exactly $60 to my name. I did not have a heavy winter coat. I did not have an umbrella. I walked the entire length of that sprawling manicured driveway in the pitch-black dark, soaked to the bone, shivering so violently my teeth cracked together. And while I walked away from the only home I had ever known, knowing you had actively stolen my Ivy League education, you locked the deadbolt behind me and went to sleep. Howard looked down at his shoes, the color draining from his face once again. He remembered. He had stood in the foyer and watched me leave. I begged you for nothing that night. I stated, my tone dropping to a lethal, quiet register. I did not get on my knees. I did not cry. I survived. I built an empire out of the absolute nothing you left me with. You threw me into the cold, expecting me to die, and I learned how to build a fire. Beverly swallowed hard, her hands twisting the fabric of her trench coat. I know it was difficult, Caroline, and we have apologized for that. But you won in the end. You got your degree, you got your money, and now you bought the house. We can finally be a real family again. We can go home. I stared at her, letting a slow, razor-sharp smile curve my lips. It was the same smile I used when a hostile takeover was finalized and the opposing executives realized they had lost everything. You are not going home, Beverly, I said softly, the words landing like heavy stones, and you are certainly not moving back into the master suite. Beverly frowned, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. What do you mean? You just said you purchased the estate from the bank. If you own it, why can we not stay there? I did not buy the estate to live in it, I clarified, my voice echoing with terrifying absolute finality. And I certainly did not buy it to provide a luxury retirement home for the two people who enabled a criminal and treated me like a slave. Howard stepped forward, his trembling hands clutching his crumpled hat. Then why did you buy it, Caroline, if not to save us? Why spend millions of dollars on that property? I bought it because that house is a monument to every lie this family ever told. I explained, leaning slightly forward, ensuring they heard every single syllable. It is a physical manifestation of Jason's stolen wealth and your blinding arrogance. I bought the property for the land it sits on. The house itself is completely worthless to me. The realization hit Beverly like a physical strike. Her eyes widened, her mouth falling open as the horrifying truth finally pierced through her dense layer of entitlement. "No," she gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. "You cannot! You would not do that!" "I already did," I replied, feeling a profound, absolute sense of closure wash over my entire being. "I finalized the demolition permits this afternoon. The bulldozers and the excavation crews are scheduled to arrive next Monday morning. They are going to tear your beautiful, sprawling colonial mansion down to the bare foundation. They are going to crush the marble foyer where you treated me like garbage. They are going to smash the dining room where you mocked my career. They are going to reduce your precious family legacy to a pile of shattered wood and broken glass." Beverly let out a horrific, guttural scream. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire identity being fed into a wood chipper. She lunged forward, her hands clawing wildly toward my face, completely losing her mind. I did not even have to move. The security guards at the end of the hall closed the distance in two massive strides. One guard stepped smoothly in front of me, grabbing Beverly by the shoulders and forcefully pushing her back. The second guard grabbed Howard by the arm, securing him before he could make a sudden movement. "Get your hands off me!" Beverly shrieked, thrashing against the guard's iron grip. "You are a monster, Caroline. You are a cold, vindictive monster. That is my home. That is my life." "That was a crime scene," I corrected her, completely unbothered by her frantic screaming. "And now it is just an empty lot waiting to be cleared." I stepped back into the warm, quiet sanctuary of my penthouse. I looked at my parents one last time. They were broken, destitute, and completely stripped of their false royalty. They had absolutely nothing left to leverage. "Security, escort these two individuals out of the building," I commanded, my voice calm and perfectly detached. "If they ever return to this address, call the police and have them arrested for trespassing." I grabbed the heavy mahogany door and pushed it forward. The last thing I saw before the lock clicked shut was Beverly's weeping, devastated face, finally realizing that the daughter she threw away had just buried her empire in the dirt. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, sealing the hallway and completely severing my ties to the Hayes family. I stood in the quiet sanctuary of my penthouse, listening to the muffled, frantic protests of Beverly fading away as my security detail escorted her and Howard into the private elevator. The descent was rapid. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the rain-slicked Manhattan streets. A few minutes later, two tiny soaked figures emerged onto the pavement, shivering in the freezing cold. They looked up toward my floor, but the tinted glass offered them nothing but their own pathetic reflections. I turned my back on them, poured a fresh glass of sparkling water, and finally exhaled. The war was officially over. I lied to Beverly, of course. I had absolutely no intention of demolishing a perfectly structured, structurally sound piece of prime Connecticut real estate. Telling her the bulldozers were coming was simply the final necessary strike to obliterate her towering, fragile ego. When Monday morning arrived, the heavy machinery that rolled up the sprawling driveway did not belong to a demolition crew. They belonged to a high-end commercial renovation firm hired directly by my private foundation. Over the next 6 months, the sprawling colonial mansion underwent a radical, permanent transformation. The formal dining room where I had been ruthlessly mocked and told I owed them my life was stripped of its pretentious silk wallpaper and converted into a state-of-the-art legal clinic. The master suite, once a shrine to Beverly's paralyzing vanity and endless collection of designer bags, was gutted entirely and transformed into temporary emergency housing. The grand foyer where I had dropped the laundry basket on my way out 6 years prior now featured a polished brass plaque replacing the arrogant Hayes family crest. The plaque read, "The Vanguard Center for Economic Independence." I had turned their precious, gate-kept monument of generational wealth into a free financial and legal aid sanctuary. It was specifically designed for college students and young adults suffering from domestic economic abuse, financial manipulation, and family coercion. I hired top-tier attorneys, financial planners, and therapists to provide free counsel to young people whose parents were using tuition, housing, and inheritance as weapons of control. We gave them the exact tools, legal protection, and financial escape routes that I had been forced to forge entirely on my own. It was the ultimate desecration of the Hayes family legacy. I took the fortress they used to keep people out, and I opened the doors to everyone they deemed beneath them. While my new foundation flourished, the swift, brutal hammer of the federal justice system crushed what remained of my brother. Jason's trial was a spectacular, highly publicized disaster. Without my silent accounting to shield him, his defense completely crumbled. The federal prosecutors, armed with the encrypted ledgers Jasmine had eagerly handed over, dismantled his pathetic excuses in less than 2 days. The judge was entirely unsympathetic to a privileged CEO who stole from working-class pension funds to finance luxury yachts and diamond bracelets. Jason wept openly in the courtroom when the verdict was read. He was sentenced to 3 years in a federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his assets and permanently barred from ever holding an executive corporate position again. He traded his bespoke tuxedo for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, finally forced to pay the tab for his staggering incompetence. Jasmine avoided prison, but her survival came at a catastrophic permanent cost. The immunity deal kept her out of a jail cell, but it did not protect her from the Securities and Exchange Commission. The federal government seized the offshore shell companies, liquidated the yacht, auctioned the jewelry, and drained her hidden emergency funds to pay back the defrauded employees. Furthermore, the State Real Estate Commission reviewed the federal indictments and immediately revoked her luxury broker license permanently. Stripped of her wealth, her elite status, and her ability to sell high-end properties, Jasmine was completely exiled from the Connecticut high society she worshipped. The last update I received from a mutual contact indicated she was working as a shift manager at a mid-tier retail store, living in a cramped rental entirely ignored by the wealthy clients she used to manipulate. Beverly and Howard faced the most agonizing punishment of all. They faced total, absolute social erasure. Following the bank foreclosure, they were violently ejected from the affluent world they had sacrificed their daughter to maintain. Without Jason's fraudulent company funding their lavish lifestyle, they were forced to rent a tiny rundown 2-bedroom apartment in a heavily industrialized, low-income neighborhood on the wrong side of the city. The fall from grace was absolute. The exclusive country club revoked their membership immediately, citing the moral turpitude clause in their bylaws, due to Jason's highly publicized federal conviction. Their wealthy friends, the politicians, and the hospital administrators they had spent decades desperately trying to impress, dropped them instantly. Their phone calls went straight to voicemail. Their prestigious invitations completely stopped. Once Beverly attempted to attend a local charity luncheon hoping to salvage a scrap of her former glory. The event organizers quietly asked security to escort her off the premises before she even reached the ballroom. On another occasion, she was spotted at a discount grocery store clutching a handful of coupons. She tried to wave at a former country club acquaintance in the produce aisle, but the woman looked right through Beverly as if she were completely invisible, turning her shopping cart in the opposite direction. They had become social pariahs. They were radioactive ghosts haunting the fringes of a society that now viewed them with profound, undeniable disgust. They had built their entire identities on the approval of wealthy strangers, and now they had absolutely nothing but each other and the suffocating walls of a cheap apartment. 1,000 words. I stood in the sunlit atrium of the Vanguard Center for Economic Independence, watching the vibrant, relentless energy of a completely different kind of corporate machine. Where Beverly once hosted hollow, pretentious tea parties to impress vapid socialites, a team of razor-sharp financial analysts, and aggressive pro bono attorneys now moved with absolute purpose. The heavy, oppressive silence of the old Hayes estate had been entirely eradicated, replaced by the humming, productive sound of young men and women actively taking back their stolen futures. I watched a young woman no older than 20 sitting across from one of my top-tier lawyers. She was crying, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of profound relief as she signed the legal documents that permanently severed her controlling parents from her college trust fund. Beside her sat a young man who had just successfully frozen his credit to stop his father from taking out fraudulent loans in his name. We were dismantling generational financial abuse, brick by brick, providing the exact armor I had been forced to forge entirely alone in the dark. The heavy glass doors of the main entrance slid open, and Dean Carter stepped into the bustling atrium. Even dressed down in a casual navy blazer, he commanded the immediate respect of the room. He did not look at the marble floors or the vaulted ceilings. His piercing gaze tracked the flow of operations, the sheer efficiency of the sanctuary I had constructed from the ashes of my toxic family. I walked over to greet him, extending my hand. He took it, his grip as firm and assessing as it had been on that freezing morning in Boston 6 years ago. "You completely gutted the structural load bearing walls of the East Wing," Carter noted, looking up at the modernized open concept architecture. "It is highly impressive, Caroline. You stripped away the decay and built a fortress." "I kept the foundation," I replied smoothly, standing beside him as we watched a team of financial advisors review a distressed student loan portfolio. Everything else was entirely rotting from the inside out. It needed a brutal, unapologetic renovation. Carter offered a slow, knowing smile. "I was reviewing the quarterly metrics for the Vanguard portfolio this morning. The Hayes Medical acquisition has already yielded a 40% return on investment since we liquidated the toxic assets and restructured the viable patents. Your hostile takeover was flawless. But this," he gestured broadly to the bustling aid center around us, "this is an entirely different kind of dividend. This is the real legacy." I stated, my voice steady and absolute. "You taught me that a brilliant investor does not just acquire capital. A brilliant investor identifies heavily undervalued assets that the rest of the world has discarded and provides them with the exact resources they need to become untouchable." Carter looked at me, a rare expression of genuine paternal pride softening his sharp features. "6 years ago, I looked at a wet, exhausted girl holding a police report, and I saw a lethal corporate predator waiting to be unleashed. I gave you the key, Caroline, but you kicked down the door entirely on your own." "I had a solid mentor," I acknowledged, offering a rare, authentic smile. "And a team that actually understands loyalty." David, my brilliant assistant, walked past us, handing me a freshly printed legal dossier for the next client. He gave Carter a sharp, respectful nod before heading back to the administrative wing. I looked around the room, taking in the faces of my attorneys, my financial planners and mentors like Carter, who had stood by me when I had absolutely nothing. "Blood does not make a family," I said quietly, voicing the profound realization that had guided my entire ascent. "Blood is just a biological accident. Family is a deliberate, conscious choice. It is the people who hand you a sword when you are surrounded by wolves, rather than the people who try to throw you to them." Carter nodded in absolute agreement. "You chose well, senior partner." "So did you, Dean," I replied. After Carter departed, I walked slowly down the corridor that used to lead to Beverly's master suite. It was now my primary executive office. The room was sleek, modern, and entirely stripped of its former suffocating vanity. I walked around the massive mahogany desk and turned to face the wall behind my leather chair. Hanging perfectly centered on the pristine white wall was a heavy, custom-built glass frame. Inside the protective glass rested two highly specific pieces of paper. On the left was the original yellowed envelope from the Harvard Business School, its top edge cleanly sliced open. On the right was the cream-colored acceptance letter, the ink faded but the words blazing with undeniable power. I stood in the silence of my office, tracing the outline of the frame with my eyes. For the first 28 years of my life, I believed that family was an inescapable debt. I was taught that the title of daughter meant being an eternal subservient debtor to the people who provided me with basic shelter. I was brainwashed into believing that walking away from toxic bloodlines was the ultimate unforgivable sin. They weaponized my loyalty. They used my desperate desire for parental validation as a chain to keep me locked in their comfortable gilded cage. Beverly and Howard genuinely believed that if they kept me small, if they hid my potential and fed me a constant diet of criticism and manufactured failure, I would never realize my own staggering strength. They thought that by stealing my acceptance letter, they had successfully stolen my entire future. They were fundamentally catastrophically wrong. A piece of paper does not dictate a destiny. An Ivy League admission does not forge a titan. The brutal, relentless grind of surviving their abuse is what forged me. They thought they were burying a weak, unremarkable girl in their shadow, but they were actually applying the exact agonizing pressure required to create a diamond. Family is not a cage you owe your life to. It is not a lifelong sentence of servitude disguised as unconditional love. You do not owe your sanity, your financial security, or your future to people who actively plot your destruction behind closed doors. The people who demand that you shrink yourself to make them feel powerful are not your protectors, they are your wardens. You are allowed to burn the cage down. You are allowed to walk out into the freezing rain and completely reinvent yourself. You are allowed to aggressively sever the toxic roots that are strangling you and plant yourself in entirely new, fertile soil. You are allowed to choose your own family, surround yourself with brilliant, supportive allies, and build an empire that your abusers could never even begin to comprehend. My mother hid my Harvard acceptance letter for 6 years just to keep me useful at home. She thought locking away a single envelope would keep me blind, obedient, and thoroughly trapped in her narrative of my failure. But the truth is, the future is not something that arrives in the mail. It is something you forcefully, unapologetically carve out for yourself with your own 2 bare hands. Beverly hid the letter, but I am the one who ultimately opened my own future, and it is a future they will never ever get to touch. The most profound lesson here is that blood does not automatically equal family. We are often conditioned to remain loyal to our relatives, even when they subject us to cruelty and manipulation. However, true family is defined by mutual respect, unconditional support, and the choice to protect one another. Walking away from a toxic environment is never an act of betrayal. It is a necessary act of survival and self-respect. You have the absolute right to leave your cage and build an empire of your own. Have you ever had to cut ties to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below.